spring and once in the fall. It's a statutory body of the New York State Probation Commission. That's important to recognize. We have a very full agenda, but before I go forward, after I've welcomed all of you, I want to introduce Dean DeFuscio, who's our Deputy Commissioner at the Division of Criminal Justice Services, and Dean oversees strategic planning and basically financial services. We were fortunate some time back, a year or two, to grab Dean from the Department of the Budget, which has certainly served probation and this agency in a larger sense very, very well. So Dean, maybe you want to just say a couple words or whatever. Sure. Welcome the group from Commission. Tell us, but also tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Dean DeFuscio, and again, I'm Deputy Commissioner of Policy and Planning. I worked at the Division of Budget for 19 years in the Public Protection Unit and worked very closely with a multitude of the public protection agencies like DOCS, DCJS, probation, and courts as well for a time period. So I'm happy to be here, and on behalf of Commissioner Rosado, just wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for the great work that you do for New York State Probation.
All right, thank you, Dean. And my apologies to our managers. I know we have our backs to you. This isn't the ideal setup, but I apologize for that, and our staff as well. So I want to make that clear. I want to give the members of the commission the opportunity to introduce themselves this morning. We have a new member that I'd also like to introduce at some point. And let's start off with Commissioner Posey, because I'm looking at your picture straight on, Commissioner. Maybe you can say a few words and introduce yourself.
Hey, Robert, how are you? I was looking forward to trying to come up to Albany today to be there in person, but unfortunately I got roped into a 9 o'clock WebEx with the dormitory authority on the construction issue of our new detention facility down here. So, please accept my apologies for not being there, but hopefully I'll be able to get up there for the next meeting. So glad to be here.
All right, I understand that because actually you pushed for the in-person meeting. You said
I felt so bad when they threw that meeting on the calendar, but you know how important it is. I didn't want to cancel a meeting with the dormitory authority because we're making great progress right now and moving towards getting some initial designs done on the building, and hopefully by this time next year we'll have some construction going on in the county to add the new juvenile detention facility for the 9th Judicial District.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner. Mary Ellen Still is the Director of the Dutchess County Probation Department. Mary Ellen.
Good morning. As Bob mentioned, my name is Mary Ellen Still. I'm the Director in Dutchess County Probation and Community Corrections, and I'm a fairly new member of the Commission.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Appreciate that. Also, at this time, I'd like to introduce Joseph Huogo, who's a probation supervisor in Jefferson County, represents the New York State Probation Officers Association slot on the New York State Probation Commission. Joe.
Good morning. Thanks for having us this morning. And I enjoyed my long commute this morning. It was only a little over 3 hours, but at least there was no snow. I'm pleased to be here from Jefferson County and past president of the New York State Probation Officers Association, or immediate past president, I should say, and still serve on the board there.
And Joe told me this morning that he was finally able to shift off and pass off the fire chief position up in Jefferson County. And I know that was quite a responsibility. Joe was really doing 2 full-time jobs when you think about it.
13 years.
13 years. And you had quite the factory explosion the last time we spoke.
We did, yes.
All right. So you've got Joe full-time. Good to hear. And I'm glad you were able to find someone capable of doing that. Jeff Butts is, I believe, on the line. Jeff and from John Jay. And Jeff had a little interruption earlier in the week and he wasn't able to join us because I know Jeff intended to come up. I was down at John Jay at the Safe and Just conference just last week, and Jeff and I got the opportunity to speak, and we were talking about how we used the COVID to get on the treadmill. So Jeff and I are feeling healthier than ever, right, Jeff? So Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm sorry I can't be there, but I do intend to come to the meetings next time. So I started out as a juvenile court counselor more than 40 years ago, and since then I've been sinking slowly into the swamp of research, and that's all I do now. Happy to be here.
And pleased to have you, Jeff. I just want to say that, on occasion, if you want to Google Jeff's research, you'll find it goes on for about 10 to 12 pages, as I recall. I mean, just world renowned in his research capacity. We're really fortunate in having you on the Probation Commission, Jeff, because we are an evidence-based state and shop here at DCJS. So we really appreciate, your expertise and contributions. Thank you. At this time, I want to introduce our new member, and I'm really pleased to be able to do this, and that's Ana Bermudez, former commissioner of the New York City Department of Probation Extraordinaire, and nationally known in leading evidence-based practice work and transformation of that department down there. So Ana, please introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Good to see all familiar faces. Everybody from DCJS and OPCA and Rocco. Finally, I see you. So my name is Ana Bermudez. I was the commissioner for New York City for 8.5 years or so, and before that, I was deputy for juvenile. After having been a recovering lawyer for many years, I guess. Very excited to be here because it lets me stay connected to the work and be part of the probation community, which was a very, very important and significant part of my life. So thank you for having me, and looking forward to working together.
Thank you. And I know, Ana, you've been traveling, getting to see your mom more and family, which is great. And Ana and I are going to work on a number of things going forward. So Ana, really pleased that you were able to join the commission. Thank you.
And I'm hoping to see you at the APA conference.
I will be there.
Yes.
I will be there. I'll be at Oswego also. So.
There you go. All right. And representing COPA today is Greene County Probation Director Alan Frisbee, Lucy Taylor Welch, the president, who concludes her term, I think, in June. Also, Lucy advised me that she's retiring in June after over 30 years of public service. Alan, thank you for making the trip up. Before Alan introduces himself, I just want to thank Alan, because Alan has been the steady force in providing us assistance in the development of the Criminal History Record Information Caseload Explorer integration. Alan's been the tester. Several others have as well. Val Nagarado from Ulster County, Amy Gill from Onondaga County. But Alan's been the steady voice and saying, Bob, you don't have it right yet. So, but he says it's working now. Alan, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Alan Frisbee, the Director of Greene County Probation. I am the COPA Vice President, and as Bob said, I'm filling in for Lucy today, and I'd like to thank Albany for the stinking hills to have to climb to walk up here. So any stress that I had over the integration project, I think I just worked off to my cardiologist satisfaction.
All right, Alan, thank you. And again, Anthony Perry's going to be joining us shortly. I know we also have a representative on the phone from the New York State Probation Officers Association filling in for Gladys Larson. And if you want to introduce yourself now, that would be appropriate. Okay, we'll probably hear from that person a little later. I also want to take the opportunity to have our staff, our wonderful staff, I should add, and I mean that, who do just an extraordinary job. Introduce themselves. Patty, comments first.
Sure. So Patty Clemens, I'm the Director of Training here for DCJS Office of Probation. I'm Kelly Palmetier. I am the Manager of the Interstate Compact Unit here at DCJS OPCA.
I'm Kimberly Chabon, and I am the Manager of the Finances and Contractual functions of our office.
I'm Teresa Scanu-Hansen. I'm the Manager of the Juvenile Probation Operations Team.
I'm Michelle Clark. I'm the Manager of the Vocation, Education, Employment, and Reentry Unit at OPCA. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nicole Aldi. I am the manager of the Alternatives to Incarceration Unit here at OPCA.
Gary Goble, Assistant Director. My areas of assignment are criminal court probation, juvenile court probation, family court probation, and training. And our other Assistant Director, Matt Charton, is waiting for Anthony Perry outside.
Good morning, everyone. Michelle Melendez. I work with the New York Side ID program and assist Lenny Price with anything else that needs to happen with the manufacturers.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all, and welcome. So, again, Anthony will be joining us shortly. So, let me start by just, I think we've done all the introductions. I'm going to ask folks to take a quick look at the November 17th, 2022 minutes at this time. I know you're all busy, you may not have had that opportunity. And in a moment, I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the November 17th, 2022 Probation Commission meeting. Okay, can I hear a motion from a member of the Probation Commission at this time?
So moved.
Mary Ellen Still has made a motion, seconded. Joe Wogo, I heard. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed, abstentions, having heard none, the minutes of the November 17th, 2022 meeting are approved. I'm going to ask, in the interest of course time, that we will move on to item 5 at this time. We'll skip item 4. But I do want to note that we now have a new Chief Judge, Rowan Wilson, Chief of the Justice of the Court of Appeals, and we also have a Chief Administrative Judge, Joseph Zayas, who has now been appointed, taking over for Judge Tomiko Amaker. I think Judge Tomiko Amaker is a Deputy Chief now, Administrative Judge, and so we will be working to replace the Representative Robert Mandelbaum as well, actually. So we'll move on. I think Mandelbaum's actually on the Interstate Compact, so that was the last week's meeting, the council, but we will be replacing Judge Mandelbaum at some point. So we'll be working with the Chief Judge and the Chief Administrative Judge on those matters. What we're going to do now is, Lucy, at item 5, we're moving down to item 5. And Gary, I'm going to ask that you go up and take a seat by Joseph Wargo, because Gary Gogo has some information to impart on this. But the question was raised by the New York State Council of Probation Administrators President, Lucy Taylor Welch, about the possibility of implementing and utilizing continuous recruitment. As I think all of us appreciate in this post-COVID environment, it is becoming increasingly difficult to recruit people in law enforcement, corrections, probation, parole, and frankly, for that matter, a number of key areas where, thank you, good point, just acknowledging that Anthony Perry, counsel to the Chief Administrative Judge, has joined us. Welcome. Just getting started.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry for being a little bit late.
No, not at all. So we know that these fields and many more are having problems in recruiting individuals. And so the notion was, is there any opportunity for us to pursue continuous improvement in testing? And we did reach out to the Department of Civil Service on this. And in addition, we did our own independent research. And I wanted to call on Gary Goble to find out, to report what he's determined, and then open it up for discussion about what departments are hearing among the Probation Commission members with respect to recruitment, because I hear different stories out there in different places. There's a lot of things that impact recruitment. Salary impacts recruitment and retention as well. But Gary, can you share that with us, the information you've gleaned?
Thank you, Bob. So just to rewind back a little bit, last year at the POA conference, in the presentation that Daniela Jackson and I did include some statewide testing information for the entry-level civil service positions. I recall Joe was there. I recall Phil Galuppi was there. So I know there's a couple of people who were there. But, you know, over the years, there have been fewer people taking the probation exams. And I recall that you said in New York City, it hasn't necessarily been people taking it, but retention. So there's a couple separate but related issues here. So that being said, as Bob had mentioned, you know, there was an inquiry about continuous recruitment. And there is in existing civil service law, section 57, continuous recruitment for certain positions. So there is existing statute on that. And then in, you know, the 2024 budget, you know, the governor also announced, you know, further advocacy for, you know, continuous recruitment, development of, you know, regional testing centers and so forth. So there might be some additional opportunities to explore this. However, all that being said, our outreach to civil service initially said that, you know, there might be some concerns about utilizing this with the entry-level probation positions at this point, because the probation exams can be, you know, offered every year, but they're not being ordered every year by probation departments across the board. So I think they might be questioning a little bit whether there's a need for continuous recruitment. But I think that's something that we can continue to explore with them. So I think, you know, that being said, I think, you know, it is important to hear from the commission and, you know, the, you know, organizations that they represent. I mean, what have they been experiencing for recruitment, quality candidates identified, and so forth?
Thank you, Gary. So essentially, our determination with the Department of Civil Service is that current law provides for continuous improvement. And of course, in probation, we have 58 separate employers, the 57 counties in the great city of New York. But it is up to those individual directors, we believe, of human resources or personnel to request those examinations. And if the need dictated that it would be beneficial to do that, our feeling is that that's something the local probation directors and commissioners need to work out with their personnel departments and HR services in representing that it would be advantageous to do so. So I think the enabling legislation, and I'm using that kind of loosely, the enabling legislation is there. But in fact, the option has to be taken by counties. I think traditionally they've provided that exam once a year, and you know how tradition says we've always done it that way. But that doesn't mean that's the way we should continue, because times are changing. So that's our initial take at this subject. But certainly, you know, we want to hear questions from the commission members and opportunity to discuss this, as well as potential issues that you're having in recruiting. So let me put Commissioner Posey on the spot in Westchester. He's a pretty busy shop over there, up there in Westchester. He's got a fairly large department. Commissioner Posey, what's your take on this? Are you having problems with recruiting probation officers?
No, not really. You know, we've had a number of people take the test. As a matter of fact, we've been doing a lot of hiring, you know, and I've found our personnel, you know, department, our human resources department, they work very closely with us. If we feel as though, you know, we've gotten to a point where we need to do another test, we want to get a fresh list. You know, we've kind of exhausted a list. You know, they usually work with us and we'll order another test. So I think you're right, Bob. It's you know, it's a county issue, you know, on how often, you know, you give the test. I do want to say one thing. We've had some issue in trying to recruit Spanish-speaking probation officers. You know, we had a list, we exhausted it, you know, and, you know, in that area, we've had some recruitment issues, but, you know, in the other areas, we've been okay.
Interesting. You might want to speak with Director Phil Galuppi. He's on the line. I saw his name pop up here from Onondaga. Of course, Phil's utilized the community liaison position and something that you might want to pursue in the ability to reach into both the Hispanic community, Latino community, and Black community as an option of recruiting and diversifying the department, getting the people you need. So another option there for you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. But, you know, we've really been reaching out. You know, we've been networking. County Exec's office has been working with us, as well as Human Resources. You know, we've been going to different sites, you know, and trying to get the word out there to get as many people, to take not only the probation officers test, but some of the, administrative positions that we have here too.
All right, good, thank you.
As a quick follow-up to the Spanish speaking, so Title IX, NYCR Appendix H10, everybody's aware that, contains the descriptions for the probation professional positions. There is another language provision in there. So in addition to Spanish speaking, for example, Madison County has significant refugee populations. If they identify a need, specific to whatever community, they could request their local civil service agency to, recruit for those positions for any language.
That's an important point. So when we went, we redid the H10, the standard specifications for professional probation positions, a 12-year endeavor, I might add, with the Department of Civil Service, who worked pretty handily with us. We approached the New York State Division of Human Rights, and they came back to us and said, why Spanish speaking? Why not probation officers other languages? Gary Gobles just pointed out Madison County was out there last week, but also in Utica, refugee center there. So, every county can utilize different positions. So I want to give you that advice, and certainly call Phil and speak with him in terms of what he's doing, because he's implemented the class program. And in our recent 15-city tour, we visited Rochester with the commissioner and Onondaga, both Monroe and Onondaga counties, the 15-city tour, and Phil presented on the community liaison class program. Pretty impressive with what they're doing out there. So other directors on the subject, Mary Ellen.
Yes, similar to Rocco, we really have not had a lot of difficulty in recruiting. Several years ago, we discussed with our Human Resources Department adding a probation officer training exam, and that really expanded our pool of candidates. So when we see the list that we have starting to decrease, we get in touch with our Human Resources Director. They've been very responsive. So we work with them, and they'll call for another test if there's a need for it.
Good. So it's different in every county. Like I say, if you've been to one county in New York State, you've been to one county in New York State. And that's how it goes. But other input?
I think we've had, in Jefferson County, we've maintained a full complement of staff. We've been lucky to continue to hire as needed. And we had our last position filled and academy completed, I think, at the fall academy, just before the new basic course for peace officers went into effect. At this point, our staffing is full, and I do hear from people out in the community working at various different agencies, when's the next probation test being offered? When's the next? People are actually looking forward, in my experience, in my community where I'm working. We have a lot of different social work agencies in our community that are looking to not get out of that field, but they like working with juvenile probation and are looking to go to that next step and working with us, which was kind of exciting to see and kind of fun. It kind of makes you feel good, like we're doing good work and it's being recognized.
Joe, when I go out to dinner with the recruits, the new officers rather, just last month, we did a fundamentals here in Albany. That might be called actually the Dutchess County Fundamentals, because we had, I think, 8 candidates from Dutchess, but I met them all, and I went out to dinner with them, and what they said to me, I asked them, why is it that you've chosen this field? And they've had other jobs in different social service agencies, and said, because we feel it's an opportunity to make a difference. So we are getting good recruits, but what we're hearing is it's different in different counties. Alan, small county, Greene County, any issue there? Thank you.
No, because we haven't had any professional hiring in 6 years. So, but in a few years, there's going to be some of the senior in age and senior in time on the job people leaving. So then we'll be into
different
new hires.
And Anna, New York
Yeah,
City.
New York City, we're not having problems. We were not having problems, let me say. Currently, because I don't know currently, but the issue had not been recruiting. The issue had been retention and, between salaries and also the retirement age issue and not being equal to other sort of law enforcement agencies and that kind of stuff has affected people's, remaining on the job. But
Yeah, and retention's a real issue in New York City.
especially for the 5-year, that first 5 years.
Right.
But it also has a lot to do with how the union contract was negotiated the last time and, because the steps are not commensurate, are not fast enough, basically, to reduce it to its, and so people leave and then they come back, actually, a fair number come back after they realize that other jobs that pay more are not as good in terms of the culture and so,
I think you're right. Kim Merby told me that this morning. She's in 118 through our SOGI training.
Oh, they're here, okay.
Yeah, they're here. You may want to jump in.
Yeah,
and say,
no,
Ian Grugin is doing our SOGI training this morning as part of our anchor training, a 4-day anchor training that Patty's orchestrated right after the fundamentals, no rest for the weary. And they told me, yeah, people do come back. So I don't know whether Gladys Larson is on the line at this time or her representative would like to speak to the statewide picture with respect to recruitment. Okay, Gladys, you should be able to unmute yourself. You're a guest speaker. So, and Katie, if you can turn Gladys on or her representative, that'd be great. All right.
While we're waiting, I know anecdotally we have heard from some smaller departments that, they have like 4 candidates take the test. So I think, as you pointed out, there is significant, disparity on this issue from one county to the next.
There is. I think that's the best explanation, that there's a lot of disparity across the state. It differs jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But this might be something that, going forward, that COPA, Allen, and POA could collaborate on in doing some promotion for recruitment on a statewide basis. We work with the associations. I think that would be something we could work on,
Can I just ask a clarifying
sure.
question? On the statute, Gary, is that, you said it was for certain positions. Does the position have to be added to the statute, or is it just a civil service determination?
In civil service law, it says continuous recruitment for certain positions. So I think we'd have to explore further whether there are any restrictions there. But it does say either state or municipalities can pursue it. So I think a local civil service position could bring that to, the state civil service. But, it does appear that there is, enacted legislation for that.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Post.
Yeah, Bob, one of the things that we're going to be doing, I think, and we'll have it in place by the time we give the next exam, is a physical agility portion to the hiring. And we're going to be looking at that to see, whether that kind of changes, the numbers, whether we will still get, once people find out they've got to go through an agility test, because, we're finding now with the demands of going through, firearms training and defensive tactics and all the other things, that we're now doing, that we got to make sure that we have people coming in that can really do those things. It would be interesting to see, what happens there, whether or not that reduces the pool.
Yeah, you touched on, I think, something really important there, Commissioner. And when we addressed, Patty and I went down and addressed the Municipal Police Training Council, I think it was March 8th, 2022, and requested a 9-month extension for the effective date for the basic course for peace officers, for probation officers. It was for that reason. We got the 9-month extension to January 1st, 2023, based on the fact that there are 58 employers out there. And if, in fact, we're going to make the basic course for peace officers a requirement, that 162 hours now, and it includes defensive tactics, it was foreseeable that some personnel officers might want to include that in the announcement, so candidates know what is expected of them when they take that test. Now, I want to be careful here that defensive tactics doesn't equate to a fireman professional's physical agility test. You're not running up 25 stories with an air tank on your back. Most people can of average physical health can pass defensive tactics. That's what the state training directors have told Patty and I. So the vast majority, but still, I think personnel officers may want to give that notice. So you raise a good point. And that's something that I think the directors on this line, please hear me. Please work with your personnel directors and ensure that that is made clear in the announcement, that candidates will be expected, one, to complete fundamentals, to complete the basic course for peace officers, and part of the basic course, statewide approved course now, includes 40 hours of defensive tactics. So very, very important point, right? All right, any other comment on continuous recruitment? Later, we're going to speak about something very related to this issue in terms of hiring and when we actually authorize probation officers to do probation tasks. It's been a long-held concern of mine in terms of potential liability for departments where we hire people. Sometimes it takes 3 to 6 months to actually get them trained in the fundamentals. And I know Westchester and New York City do it differently. They hire, they train, and then they assign, which is probably the way to go, but we need to talk about that a little later. So I'm going to move on. Actually, I'm going to conclude this conversation and move us to item 4. Before I do, I want to introduce both Matt Charton, our Assistant Director, who oversees the vocation education, alternatives to incarceration, and interstate units. Matt, thank you. And Anthony Perry, counsel to our new Chief Administrative Judge, Joseph Zayas. And so, Anthony, maybe you want to bring some greetings from the judge and tell us what's happening in the courts.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being a little late coming from the train this morning. But yes, we'd like to extend the greetings from our new Chief Administrative Judge, Joseph Zayas, as well as our new First Deputy Chief Administrative Judge, Norman St. George, who will be working very closely with the Office of Court Administration directly. That both of those appointments became effective at the end of last week. And I'd just like to add that with Judge Zayas and with Judge St. George, that with both of those administrative judges in place, that we will have 2 individuals in leadership that will continue to bring a vast amount of experience in the criminal realm. That Chief Administrative Judge Zayas, before being part of the appellate division, was the administrative judge leading Queens Supreme Criminal Term Court, and First Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Norman St. George comes out of Nassau County, previously leading all the courts outside of New York City, then before that, Nassau County. And then back actually when I was an assistant district attorney, Judge St. George was in the county court working there for a number of years. And so that they both bring an understanding of the critical relationship between probation, the courts, the importance of communication and connections between the judges that are there on the ground in the trial courts and the probation departments that they are working with. So thank you very much for having me here. With the new administration, that we will be looking at opportunities to foster relationships with DCJS and probation departments across the state. We will also be working with our judges, as I'm sure DCJS will be working with their constituents about the new changes that will be coming to effect on June 2nd with respect to securing orders that were part of the budget that we've already begun working with the administrative judges to ensure that all the judges are aware of the changes, that we are partnering with the Judicial Institute to bring training up to date, as many of the probation departments across the state also serve as the pretrial service agencies, where some of those changes will be increasingly focused on utilizing for those individuals that need interventions with regard to mental health or substance abuse, partnering with pretrial service providers to connect those principals that are subject to the securing orders to services and treatment in hopes that they will be able to most likely return to court see whatever prosecutions they're facing through, and otherwise comply with court mandates under some of the new provisions, and additionally leave the system, no matter what the outcome of their case is, better off than they first entered. So we will be looking to not only just train the judiciary and the judges on those changes, to update them, to encourage conversations among them about the effects of those changes, but then going forward to look at how any of those changes, the dynamics of how non-monetary conditions especially are being set, and reliance on pretrial service providers and probation departments to update the courts on how they're being complied with, how we can best work together to ensure that when there are needs for additional court interventions, both before probation is actually a sentence, but then even if there's an interim sentence of probation, how we can make sure that we are connecting the dots of all the stakeholders with regard to probation departments. Related to that, we have issued for a small number of pretrial service providers and a few probation departments that are filling that role, we have issued a request for those that were only given a one-year certification as a pretrial service provider, that it's time for renewal of that application, to just ensure that there is agreement to share data with OCA as required by statute, and then just work with the state and national standards to see where that individual organization stands and how they are performing, and just making a commitment to, given the variety of circumstances that any individual county faces, that they are at least committed to doing self-reflection and working to improve over the long term. So those are the basic updates from the courts at this time. We look forward to, with the new administration under Chief Judge Wilson, to continue to work and have a wonderful relationship with DCJS that has been built up over the years, both through this probation commission, but then also especially on the data side, that we really have wonderful partners here, and we just hope to continue to foster all of those relationships. Thank you, Bob, for having us.
Thank you, Anthony. Questions, comments for Anthony regarding courts? So let me say a couple things. One is, I think the bail reform reaffirmed the importance and existence of non-monetary conditions. I think we recognize that one of the outcomes of bail reform was moving forward the intervention that ordered by courts. We have a rich history in New York State of treatment courts, which is a strength. Our probation departments are largely providing those pretrial services outside the city of New York, where it's the criminal justice agency, and a handful of others, but largely speaking, probation's involved in providing those, those interventions and getting back to the court. Some months ago, Anthony, you and I spoke about the fact that OCA does have a uniform form it's using in the pre-trial that the courts are utilizing for ordering pretrial interventions assessments. And I want to bring that subject to the forefront again and suggest that we maybe take a look at that, and with the probation community. I'm not sure the probation community is aware of it, because from their perspective, I think what they see is kind of 58 different kinds of, varieties of Heinz out there. It's different from county to county, but I didn't know about the existence of uniform pretrial condition form, and I don't know if other directors have seen it, but this might be something that we could work together on in taking a look at, perhaps where needed amending, and then working together to get this out to both the probation and pretrial community, so we would have standardized practices. So I want to bring up that subject. DCJS is in the process of working to implement a pretrial services case management system. Several weeks ago, the program development funding and OPCA met, and I know that Dean, our deputy commissioner, has been involved in that too, and we're proceeding in trying to establish a contractual relationship with a provider who can provide that service. Importantly, I see this as a single source because we want to integrate that into Audubon's case management system. So our probation officers would receive alerts in caseload on pretrial matters. So more to come on that. That's, it's a project that we hope to get started this year. It's part of DCJS's commitment to increasing funding to pretrial service agencies. As you know, we increased the funding to $20 million. Counties receive substantial funding in support of pretrial services to offset the costs associated with their functions there. So something that I think we might work on together. Before leaving this subject, I do want to say that we haven't met since November, of course, as the minutes reflect. But a lot of good work was concluded at the end of 2022, and that's working collaboratively with our partners at the Office of Court Administration, particularly Bill Perrott, William Perrott, Jess Cherry out of the Strategic Planning Services there, Office, and Anthony Perry Counsel. And that is that we came up with, first time ever, a uniform restitution collection form. And, I want to acknowledge the members of that working group, particularly then president, I think he still is president of the District Attorneys Association of the state of New York, and that's Tony Jordan, who's the Washington County prosecutor there. He played a role as well. And I think what we did is we came up with a uniform form that includes all the partners, including our friends at DOCS. So if an individual is convicted and sentenced to DOCS and restitution is ordered, DOCS actually is collecting quite a bit of money from these individuals and sending those checks to probation departments. Probation departments would in turn say, gee, I don't know about Bob Macker. I never heard of that case. You just collected it and sent us a check for, $384. We don't know the client, we don't know the victim. So with the new system, we have a statewide form, and I can't thank Office of Court Administration enough for promulgating this after a lot of work. And that includes all of the partners and a commitment by the DAs outside the city of New York that will file those civil order judgments. And Bill Perrott, I'll just end here, came up with the idea of including a uniform order with a civil order judgment in one form, pretty important, that gets filed with the county clerk as a lien against the transfer of real property. The district attorneys by law are obligated to file those with the county clerk. Within the city of New York, the Supreme Court, it's the court clerk there who is required to file those. So I think we made inroads there.
I think that it was a great effort, and that Commissioner Matheron through DCJS really brought together all the stakeholders beyond the courts and really multiple productive sessions that allowed clerks, DAs, the courts, probation departments, all to provide their input onto the best practices and how to overcome some legal hurdles and some unique local practices, both inside and outside of the city, so that one form could actually be enforceable and benefit victims that are due ongoing restitution that may not be completed by the time they complete their probationary sentence. So it was really a team effort, but thank you for your leadership on that.
You're welcome. Thank you. Tony Jordan said, Bob, I can't believe we did that virtually. Did that all virtually. We did, though. And I want to note Safe Horizons participated from New York City. They were good partners on this as well. So great work. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. Patty, I'm going to ask you to come up and sit next to Joe Wargo because we're going to talk about Part 346 staff development. So probation directors. So this is an important subject. Part 346, our staff development regulation, DCJS. It seems to me that every 25 years, whether you need it or not, you should revisit a regulation, okay? And it's been that long since we have visited 346. Why is this important? And I'm going to lay the groundwork, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patty. First and foremost, basic course for peace officers, January 1st, 2023, found a place. And then secondly, the developing the need for uniformity with respect to training. How I regard training. Training is the vehicle by which we move practice forward. And I say this to Patty all the time, I think it's the most essential position in terms of training. So Patty, I'm going to turn it over to you if you could take us down this discussion, and then we'll hear from the directors. Sure.
Sure. So as Bob said, the development of Part 346 is something that clearly is overdue and timely with the, initial requirements changing in terms of the basic course of peace officers. And we've gone from essentially 3.5 weeks to about 9 weeks of initial training. And that's a big lift for each department. I'm so glad that Rocco brought up under the continuous recruitment conversation about this change, right? Because if the counties aren't reacting to the initial training requirements and their hiring practice, if they're not coinciding, it just creates a lot more challenges for folks. So some of the things that we're contemplating, obviously we're going to need to change some regulatory language to address the new initial requirements for training. But there's also other areas that, while we have it open, we want to explore. And those include things like a staff development officer to probation officer ratio, especially for our larger departments. Some of the departments, and New York City is one that's sticking out in my mind. I talk to Kim Irby very, very often. And she, although she has wonderful staff, she's one staff development officer. And they're running constant academies. There's an awful lot there. And so, similar to what we have in terms of supervisors and probation officer ratios, we're contemplating this kind of idea. So that's one thing that we'll be talking about. Another area that we want to consider is the certification and qualifications of the academies themselves. So we currently have the 7 fundamentals academies and roughly 7 BCPO. I think Erie County right now is kind of on the fence, but we are also hearing from other places that they are looking to stand up their own academies to meet the need, right? And we understand that. The academies have served the state well. We're spread out. Usually folks can get their people there and get their training done. But as Bob mentioned in a kind of a precursor conversation, some of the academies are able to get their folks through before they have to assign caseloads, before they have other duties. We in the Albany Academy run our academy twice a year because the regulation says they have to have that training within 6 months, the fundamentals training. So we offer our academy twice a year. But sometimes, and a lot of times, the counties will hire folks and then they have to be on the job for a period of time. They're small enough departments where they have to perform or potentially be put in places where they need to perform peace officer duties before their training is actually delivered. And it's a constant conversation that I have with new recruits coming in. And it's one you have to kind of tiptoe around, right? So, to eliminate those things, we would love to be able to explore the idea of how do we put training in place consistently and make it accessible to every department so that they are not in that quandary. They should be able to hire, get somebody through their training, and then, start assigning them duties. Not an easy task, but certainly something that we can explore. And outside of that, we want to be able to standardize what does it take to deliver a fundamentals academy? What does it take to deliver a BCPO academy? What are those instructor certifications look like? What is that process? What does your building have to be? So there's a whole lot of things that we have to contemplate, not only for ourselves as we think about developing a BCPO, but for everyone else. We need that standardization. I have the benefit of working with 6 excellent academies right now, but we're all going to be going, at some point, we're not all going to be the same people running these academies. So the standardization of that practice is really critical. And then, somewhat kind of outside the box, I guess, thinking, but we were talking about an accreditation standard for the academies. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had. And when we think about accreditation that our Office of Public Safety has in place for police agencies, they've created centers of excellence within those police communities. Why wouldn't we want to strive for that, right? So accreditation standards are also something that we want to explore as part of the work group. And I don't know if I've missed anything else that you wanted to add to that. And so that bullet that you see there about consistency, those are some of the things that we're looking to put into place to try and keep things consistent across the state. It's a little tough. Like I said, I'm fortunate that I have great people, but it's tough to sit back here in Albany and know what's going on in those other 6 academies and have, the anchor training that I'm going to go back to in a minute is one of the things that we do to make sure that instructors have the same foundation. They're learning the same curriculum, they're learning how to deliver that curriculum in the same way, but we don't have simply enough staff to be able to go out to all of these locations and make sure those things are happening. So the consistency need is definitely there. And Bob, I don't know if you want to say anything more on this qualifiers. I don't know.
Yeah,
if that
so that's a buzzword that I put in there, thanks Betty, for qualifiers.
I had Bob to lead on this.
Yeah,
So.
and what it means is, and before I get to it though, I did want to say thank you, first of all, because I think Patty described very well the process. Look, we have a great training curriculum. The fundamentals of probation practice is really excellent. It is evidence-based, skill-based learning. A few states have what we really have in place, and it is uniform. We send out those materials, Patty's unit, everyone uses the same curriculum, so there's standardization. But what about the delivery of that? What about the credentials of the individual? What's their training in delivering that? There's more to running a probation academy than raising a hand and saying, I want to open an academy. I don't want to send my officers to Albany anymore. I think I can do my own academy. Not so quickly. There are certain requirements and credentials, and we don't have those spelled out in 346. And of course, you don't want to include everything in 340 in a regulation because God forbid you make a change. Rulemaking is an extensive process. We know. We wear out our legal services department with rulemaking, frankly, with the work that they've got to do. But we do need standards for what a good probation training academy looks like. What are the skills of the trainers? What are the skills in their training? How is the curriculum developed? And even Patty touched on it, even the building. What's that look like in terms of adequate space? So this is a subject that we really need to get a work groups together. We always do our best work when we pull together the directors on a work group and your representatives to talk this out. What's my goal? My goal is standardization, high quality training across the board. So probation academy, and maybe even having the requirement to submit a roster for approval where you indicate, like OPDS does, who are those trainers going to be in your local fundamentals of probation practice, where we get a roster in advance and we get to review the training credentials. So those are the things that we're looking at. Any questions on the discussion? This is really where we want to hear from the directors, and I'm going to turn to Mary Ellen Still because she is the training representative for the Council of Probation Administrators. Mary Ellen's held that position as the training rep for years.
Yeah. A number of years.
Yes.
And before that, I was on the training committee and have always, of course, been very interested in training and staff development. And it's something we encourage within our own department as well. I think it's extremely important to have general topics instructors, to have master trainers available in our departments. But I think the critical piece is the collaboration that we have with OPCA, working with Patty and developing the real high quality training that probation officers need. There's a very heavy emphasis on evidence-based training, everything that we do and we focus on. As you mentioned before, Bob, we're an evidence-based state. So it is very important to continue that. And certainly look forward to the work that the group is going to do on further staff development and where do we go from here? Because I think it's a dynamic process. We have to continue or we start to fall behind if we don't stay up to date on what the current needs are of probation officers. And we were so pleased with the changes in the fundamentals and the emphasis on evidence-based and some of the newer models and programs coming forward. And when the probation officers come back to the department, I mean, they're really able to hit the ground running. But as I said, I really think it has to be a continuation of, we really appreciate the emphasis on staff development and all the work that you've done. So thank you.
And we're in the development stage right now for this work group. I actually have kind of my rudimentary, document in front of me, and it will include people like yourself, Mary Ellen. We've reached out, to a couple folks here, and importantly, it's going to include the members of the NYPAD, the New York Probation Academy directors. I spoke about this in the November meeting. So just to refresh folks' memory, like I said, there are 7 probation academies, including Albany. Each of those has designated some staff from within their academies, and we put them together in this group called NYPAD. And initially, last year we ran our first forum out in Oriskany. Our charge was to try to develop some training materials for the basic course for peace officers. So for those who aren't familiar, when the Office of Public Safety pulled that curriculum together, right, which is essentially a compilation of pieces and parts from the police curriculum, pulled out to develop a peace officer curriculum, but it was very police oriented. It was immediately noticeable. And so our remedy was to pull this work group together. We had to develop all the PowerPoint slides. There was no student materials. It was the lesson plan. And, each academy was left to its own devices, essentially, which was not acceptable to us, right? So NYPAD did a great job. We pulled together a set of slides. We now have a pool of exam questions because an exam is required in statute, just was not provided. So we created exam questions for each site to use. And now this year, NYPAD continues. We have quarterly meetings. We continuously update one another. It's a nice way for each of those academies to have a place to collaborate and share what's going on because there's been so many changes, right? Even in the fundamentals curriculum, we just finished the Orbis revisions, find out about BCPO, and now we have to revise FPP. And by the way, that curriculum was piloted by us. It's been piloted by others, but it's been piloted by Albany for the first time this past April, just last month. We built it in 2019, started to try to do this in 2020, and then got cut off halfway through our class. So we've only delivered this curriculum virtually up until April. And now we're making a few more edits in terms of, we need more time for this. And as the virtual world and the in-person world are very, very different creatures. So that's ongoing. And in fact, the folks that I'm going to address in anchor training tomorrow will hear all about that. They're getting a new version of things. But anyway, NYPAD will be an active part. Each representative, each academy is sending a representative from those sites to be able to help enhance, the work group. So it's still in development. Those are the areas we plan to tackle. More may come up as we all continue to discuss things. But if I can continue, I know we had a couple of bullet points on the back, and I'm going to take the liberty of skipping unless you have.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But Patty, tell me, how many of the 6 other sites now are the academies are in a position to develop what I call the probation-centric basic course for peace officers? So when we received the basic course for peace officer curriculum, as many of you know, 95% of it was very good and pertinent, but there were things in there that really did not pertain to the probation officer. And that's, 8 hours on how to conduct a homicide investigation, So at that time, I said, no, we don't do that. We don't put the yellow tape around a homicide. That's not probation's job. So we use that time to talk about how to write a pre-sentence investigation on a homicide, right? Related work of probation. So the things that Patty had to lead with the directors in making that what I call probation centric. And how many of those 6 academies, Patty, now are in a position to deliver, rather than sending their officers to a police, general, parks department, whatever, harbor masters included in the peace officer training, right? It's pretty broad. How many can deliver that specifically for probation?
Yeah, so right now, 5 of the 7. Albany is not equipped, mostly because of the space requirement, and you know, we need additional resources, you know, to pull that off. And I don't want to speak for Michelle Zowie, I know she's on, but Erie County is not entirely sure. They're capable of doing it. It's a resource issue for them as well, as I'm told. It's a big lift.
Yeah.
Right, but every other site, the other 5 sites, not only are ready, but they've done it. Right, so New York City has done their own. They've sent a few out to the zone academies, but they're now doing their own or just finished one. I've lost track. They do so many academies. Westchester has done theirs. Monroe has done theirs. Nassau is currently doing their BCPO class. Suffolk has already done theirs. So they're all working through it, and as we collectively speak at these NIPAD meetings, they're sharing that feedback.
So that's quite an achievement. And Dean, what we were talking about, I know you had to step out a moment, but what we're talking about is the basic course for peace officers that was, you know, implemented for all peace officers, everyone from harbor masters, you know, guys who drive the ferries over Staten Island, to parks officers, you know, wasn't really a probation training. You could finish the 162 hours of training, and you wouldn't know anything about probation. So the fundamentals are 3 or 4-week training is essential, of course. But even the basic course for peace officers, there are things that were more, you know, pertinent to the role of the police officer, the detective in investigating a homicide. And so, you know, we don't do that. We don't put the yellow tape around the trees, you know, and do the investigation. That's police work. So we worked, Patty and the 6 academies worked to make that basic course for peace officers more probation centric, rather than 7 hours on how to conduct a homicide investigation, 7 hours on how to conduct a pre-sentence investigation for the courts on a homicide case, much more pertinent. That's our work. So they did that, and they created all the slides. And what we found is there were no uniform questions or exams for the basic course for peace officers. So we developed those as well and created a bank of, I think, 150 questions where we have uniform tests for the basic course for peace officers. So that's where we are now. We can't do the basic course for peace officer here because we don't have a physical facility where we could do defensive tactics. One of the things that's been proposed is establishing a training academy, a joint academy, where the Office of Probation, Correctional Alternatives, Office of Public Safety, and even our Office of Youth Justice with the SNUG teams would work together to have a training academy. We need that. We need that to set the standard in New York State. So we've got some work to do on that.
And it's difficult because the Albany Academy, we're kind of the melting pot, right? We, on average, get from 10 to 15 different counties represented in our classroom, right? So it presents unique challenges. You know, with those folks all, by statute, they have to have the fundamentals within 6 months of hire, right? Which is, you know, a lot more feasible to run the 2 courses. BCPO, they made it a year. Now you think about that in terms of the training requirements. A person can be hired, they have an entire year before they're certified as a peace officer, but within 6 months they have to come into the Fundamentals Academy where they learn how to do probation work, but they can't actually go out in the field because they're not peace officers. And so for myself and my instructors and the instructors in the other academies, this is a very difficult area. There's a lot of liability that comes up in here, and having these conversations, you know, I call them the kids. When these kids come in, they're like, you know, pie-eyed because we're standing there telling them, like, you shouldn't be doing that stuff. You haven't been through this course. So it's becoming problematic, and to tighten that up would really be beneficial. But there's an awful lot that goes into doing that. The other point I want to make too about the basic course, some kind of unintended consequences, if you will. So we're hearing from our academies that the defensive tactics is included, as Bob mentioned. There's 40 hours of defensive tactics that's required. In and of itself, those are, I mean, they're physically demanding enough that folks are struggling, but they're not horrific to try and pass through those 40 hours. What has become very challenging is the instructor certification to get defensive tactics instructors to be able to teach that portion of the class. Dramatically different. And so what we're hearing across the state is the probation recruits that are trying to get through the DT instructor class simply can't make it. They're dropping out. They're literally getting beaten up. And so we're trying to work with our partners in the Office of Public Safety to figure out like what exactly is going on. What has changed with these requirements in this instructor class that is making this happen. And it's not just probation recruits. A lot of folks aren't making it through the instructor course. And it presents a huge problem because the other part of that equation is there's a 6-to-1 ratio for a defensive tactics instructor to a student. Now you take an average recruit class, like we typically train between 25 and 30 in a class. A lot of the other academies are somewhere in that 20 to 30 range. You do the math, you figure out how many DT instructors you have to have, which means that each of those sites, in order to maintain their ability to do BCPO, have to pass instructor courses. OPS only offers a few a year. And so even though we had a connection with OPS initially and said, we need to run these BCPO academies, you need to get some of our folks in, they could only give us so many seats, right? So, academies are gonna run, they're like, I've got 6 people I wanna send, they might get 1 in. And then what do? Now you've got to start trying to, beg, borrow, and steal from all these other places to get DT instructors. So you can see, I don't need to paint the picture any broader than that. I think you can see where some of those challenges are. But it's all these kind of ripple effects from this initial training requirement changing. There was a lot of ripple effects into the probation community that we're still trying to recover from.
So one of the and then I'm going to open it up for questions as well, and that is this word qualifiers. I said that was my buzzword. What qualifies a probation officer to be a probation officer, and when do you employ that probation officer? And we have different practices across the state. I think what New York City and Westchester are doing, and maybe there are others, where they train a person fully before they put them out in the field is the way to go. I think that our counties frankly, are subject to liability by having a probation officer who is not fully trained and certified in the field performing probation responsibilities. And I know the departments strive to say, no, Bob, we'll have them doing pretrial services, we'll have them doing investigations, but we will not get them out in the field to do home visits, et cetera. There's still liability associated with that. So what part of this work group is going to require is for the probation community to come together and really think this through. I know some of the directors will say, wait a minute, that's going to be a hardship for me. I have to wait to hire someone until an academy is given. That is true, and academies don't occur every day. But the police community, including our own state police, has been doing this for years and years, as well as police. And in fact, I think it's time that the probation community took a fresh, hard look at this and looked at professional practice, looked at liability, and came up with a standardized requirement that, in fact, we train people before we put them out there in the community. I think that's only fair to them. It's fair for their own personal safety, and it will relate better to procedural justice in the community. So these are the things we're going to discuss on the 346 rule. As you can see, it's going to be quite the work group and quite a discussion. Questions about anything that's been discussed so far on probation training? Thoughts? Commissioner Posey, I'm looking at you. I can see that your expressions, you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, I was thinking, Bob, you're right. It would be ideal if we could, hire and they go right into the academy, but it doesn't, as you know, it doesn't happen that way. And for me, I try to, as soon as I get a vacancy, I put into to try to hire so I can get, people at least into position and then, give them some busy work, no field work or anything like that, and then get them into the academy. Because, if I wait sometimes, you never know what happens with the budget. You never know what's going to happen with the administration's, philosophy of filling positions, and if you don't go for it right away and get it when you think you can get it, then you may not get it if you try to wait, until there's an academy. So, I know the police do they hold, they don't hire until they have an academy, and the same thing with corrections. Corrections works that way. For some reason, it's been, it's a lot easier, for our county administrations, to hold back on hiring probation officers as compared to hiring police and corrections. And, I hate to say that, but that's a reality, so that's why I try to, fill vacancies as soon as I can and, and then try to, plug people into the academy as soon as we can get one. So that's my thought.
Yeah, and certainly that's what we've been doing. And I think it's worth a discussion when we balance, the pluses and the negatives. I mean, the truth is now with the 6 academies going, you don't have to wait a year. There's usually an academy going, you divide it up. And some academies are doing trainings more than once a year. You can get an officer trained. So it's part of the discussion. And I think that's what I want to invite without rendering an opinion. We're open to discussion, but we've got to hear all the various thoughts on this. Other comments from commission members?
Just a quick comment. Patty did mention before that Albany, does bring in representatives from different departments or participants from different departments. It's not uncommon that the others are regional as well, right? I mean, they're bringing people from other trainings, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and that has not always been the practice, but they definitely opened it up more. Some academies have always invited some of the regionals. More and more, they're opening that up, depending on how many recruits they have of their own. Everybody's been wonderful about just trying to, they're doing the right thing, right? If they have an open seat and someone has a need, they're pulling them in, 100%. Yep.
I did hear that we need to do some work on the instructor development piece and get instructor developers who can train the defensive tactics. So we'll pursue that with my counterpart, Michael Bonce, new deputy commissioner, great guy, former police chief from Kingston. And Michael is really implementing change there. So we'll meet with Michael, and to tell you the truth, if there's some way that we can train our own trainers,
there is, and
master
yes.
trainers, so we can train our own, because OBS has got a pretty busy mission themselves, so I can understand that they have limits on the number of people they train, but let's pursue that in our own right, working with OBS so we can develop our own cadre of trained instructors, right? Comments, questions on this 346 before Patty moves on to a couple of related areas, because I know she's going to go over to the class that we have going next door on the anchor training in shortly. So any questions on this? Hopefully we've raised more questions than there are answers. That's the whole point of today's discussion. Patty, you have some related topics you wanted to address?
Yes, so so if you skip to part 8, there was the work group. I think we've exhausted. It was B, and then the 4th bullet. I think we've covered that one. But under C, program updates, there were 2 things that we'll hit quickly. So fundamentals update, like I mentioned, we had just piloted the revised version from 2019. So we've included some more edits to that. And one of the things that you'll note here, so, Bob had approached me about trying to include some kind of an orientation on the assessment tools that we instruct on in the Albany Academy, namely the Yazzie and the New York Compass. So in this academy, what we piloted was, students get a really good sense of how to conduct the interview. That's the curriculum focus that Orbis had really honed in on, was teaching them how to actually conduct the interview, how to engage people, using all the motivational interviewing skills, because they all get 2 days of motivational interviewing, But they don't actually, during the academy, sit down in front of a computer or go through the actual assessment, right? It's just, there's another training for that. And so we had kind of experimented and will, continue to hone in on how this will best suit everyone. But it was essentially an overview. So the tool was brought up on the screen. A trainer was able to go through those questions, help the students to be able to kind of connect dots, if you will. So they learn how to do the interview, but now they actually see the question for themselves and can connect, a little bit more. They will then need to go on and do the full Compass and or Yazzie training or the LSIR, whatever assessment they're using. But it introduces the tool in a slightly different way. So we did put that in, and again, we're going to try to continue to hone in on the best way. We literally are still going through the evaluations from the April class, and we're hard on the heels of doing the anchor training. And by the way, if I can take a minute, the anchor training, I don't know who's unmuted there, but.
Can you mute your line there out in the field, please? We're getting some feedback. Thank you.
I should have mentioned this before when we talked about kind of the credentials of the academies, but the anchor training is a concept that has been in place since 2005. It's continued to be revised with the curriculum being revised, but essentially what we have in our curriculum is we have some specialty areas, namely race and equity, SOGI, which is going on right now across the hall, motivational interviewing, and we did have a specialty area in women and girls, but we found that the way the curriculum is currently written didn't really require any advanced certification. But then we also have anchor modules. So these are like the pillars, if you will, of the foundation of the curriculum. These are things like assessments, case planning, evidence-based supervision, trauma. So they're heavier topic areas and require a slightly different type of instructor to be able to deliver them. So every topic that's taught in fundamentals requires that everyone have a general topic certification. You cannot teach in the academy without that. But if you want to teach one of the specialty areas or an anchor module, you need another layer of certification to do that. And that's what's going on right now across the hall. So the anchor trainers are those folks who can only deliver the only people who can deliver the anchor modules. They can deliver any of them, and they should be able to deliver any of them, quite frankly. But they're also the folks who take over as the training director in the absence of that person. So, some of the quality assurance measures that go in, the certifications that go into that. So that's what's happening for anybody who might want to poke in your head. So in terms of the fundamentals update, the expansion on the assessments, we've had to remove some of the material that was duplicative in the basic course for peace officers, primarily the Peace Officer Week. And a few other topic areas. Procedural justice was one that we originally took out and then decided, we're putting it back in because it is one of the foundations, one of the pillars that we identified, but it's taught in a slightly different way between BCPO and fundamentals. Ethics was something that's covered in the BCPO. So just a couple of those types of revisions, and we still land roughly at 3 weeks. With those changes and modifications. My team now is going through all of the April edits to try to figure out what October will look like. But we think we've got it down pretty good, and in fact have printed manuals to that effect. So the folks who are getting the anchor training this week will walk away with that material. We also include all of that material. It's accessible electronically in a Google Drive, a shared Google Drive among the academies. So. And I think I've hit those points.
Thank you. Any questions for Patty while we have her here? Any comments on the training? I just want to say that I had spoken to Director Mary Ellen Still about the assessments, Mary Ellen, and we worked that into the fundamentals. So now what we're going to do is try to make sure we communicate that to the academies because while it's certainly not the detailed training in the Yazzie instrument for juvenile or the Compass for the adult, that training is still required, of course. It's probably the only time that you're going to hear a group that fundamentals and have the benefit of 25 others that you've gone through 4 weeks of training with in their thoughts on the questions. We have always taught individuals how to do the assessments, but we never really went through question by question. And so I think that's important, and I appreciate the training unit implementing that, and recognizing that Teresa Scano-Hansen and Nicole Aldi both came through in implementing that training, so I really appreciate that.
We appreciate that. That enhancement, I think, is so critical to give probation officers a real foundation, because doing a proper assessment is the foundation for everything else that follows. Case plans, everything that a probation officer would do. So having that type of really drilling down into how to do assessments, it's, I think, really going to make a big difference in supervision practices and doing investigations as well when they do the instruments with youth and adults, and then devise that case plan. So much appreciated.
And now you know why Mary Ellen is the rep for COPA on training and attends all the statewide training committee meetings, because we value your input. Thank you for that. Yeah, that was great. All right, we're going to go back, and Patty, if you want to jump over to, I'm going to get another team to train. Busy today. I did include a note, directors on juvenile detention beds, continuing subject of interest and frustration, more than interest and clearly frustration, and I hear you. I didn't want to gloss over it. Certainly, I'm receptive. I hear those. I talk to all the directors, and I get those emails on the limits in detention bed. I will say this, I want to have a discussion about this, but I also want to limit it because we could be here for 3 days talking about your frustrations with the lack of detention. But maybe, Joe, you can share with us some of the recent challenges that I know Jefferson has encountered, and these have been most frustrating to you. I will say that whenever we hear this, I send this up to the executives, and they send it on both to the Chamber and Office of Children and Family Services. And I do want to say that I sympathize with the Office of Children and Family Services, because you can't build bids overnight. And what Commissioner Posey did this morning with his 9 o'clock call, the reason he's not here is because Westchester is working with the Dormitory Authority in building an 80-bed regional facility for detention that'll serve the region, frankly. And when we say the region in detention, that region goes up pretty far into New York State, right? Goes all the way out to the Long Island as well. So, there are plans underway that Office of Children and Family Services is working with, I think, feverishly to try to increase detention capacity. But I do want to give directors time to hear you about some of the recent encounters. And Joe, I know I've received several emails from Christine. Maybe you can share with us.
Sure. Sort of briefly. We've had 2 cases in the last couple of months alone where the judge has ordered detention on a juvenile and there's no beds available, period. We don't have a detention facility in our county. We're a mid-sized county in Jefferson County of about 32 officers, including our director. Twice in probably the last 2 or 3 months, we've had juveniles, 2 specifically that we actually had to sit on with 3 probation officers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until their case was finally disposed of in family court through that process. At one point in time, we had them in a hotel room with 2 officers. Not an ideal situation. Our officers aren't trained to do that. We're not really doing shift work. We're generally a daytime job for the most part, albeit our officers are armed with firearms and pepper spray and whatnot. But we shouldn't be utilizing those tools because we have to hold a juvenile in a hotel room. The second one that we had, the judge had issued a warrant because the youth had taken off, absconded, whatever, and was picked up wherever. And when the child came back, he was aggressive and violent, and when we had 3 officers on him all the time. And the first night, our county administrator directed us to put him in the basement of the family court complex because there was 2 juvenile holding rooms there. not ideal, but it was better than the hotel room. And that's what we did. Well, then we got in, ruffled the feathers, shall we say, of the 5th District judge when he found out about that and sent us a letter stating so. And so the next night, we finally made other arrangements. And I will say, Commissioner Posey in Westchester County was super helpful and really bailed us out of that situation by providing us one of his beds. As we called from Erie County, Monroe, Hillbrook and Syracuse, all the way to Suffolk, Long Island, there was no beds to be had. And Commissioner Posey, your staff actually freed us a bed to be able to put this youth there until he was picked up by OCFS, because that's ultimately where the child landed. With that being said, that's a 5-hour trip each way for our officers to make that commute after been sitting on them all day in court and whatnot. The officers that did take them didn't get back until 2 in the morning. That's another issue, I suppose, of officer safety when you're on the road that much time, but it is what it is. The bed crunch is real. It's a legitimate problem. And the judges are frustrated because they feel that, well, I still have an obligation to remand this child because of his or her behaviors. They need some sort of accountability, yet there's no facility to handle those situations. And what do we do with that? It's everybody's head in this room is nodding. Everybody feels this problem across the state. If you're lucky, and I say lucky in quotes, to have a facility like this in your own catchment area or your county, you're in great shape. You're in a lot better shape than our smaller rural counties are, because we have no place to house these youth.
Thank you, Joe. I received those communications from the Director Mahoney, and I called her on it, and I was concerned about it, and I sent it up, and it was shared with the executives and the Office of Children and Family Services. Other comments on the subject of detention?
Bob, I want to say that it's a public safety issue. I know you and I have had this conversation. When Joe was just talking about, the judges, trying to figure out, what they can do if they have to, place a child in detention. It's the same. We get the same feedback from our police community too. Believe it or not, the police are actually calling Woodfield in advance of doing an arrest, asking that if we arrest this kid, do you have a bed available? And that's not good. When we have our police community being reluctant to, do what they're mandated to do, if there is an act committed, so it's besides, not having the beds, it's a real public safety issue.
And Commissioner, on several occasions, you've sent me information on the detention facility in Westchester, the census and the crimes that they're charged with, and they're pretty serious crimes. Traditionally what we heard was, in pushback, they're the population of detention, still we have probation violators and, non-violent. That's not what we're seeing. Judges are not detaining kids on minor offenses or violations of probation. This is not 1975, and frankly, I'm not sure it was done then either. But judges are struggling with the interests and balancing the interests of public safety with these limitation on resources. So with these facilities are not filled with probation violators. And, I believe at one point you had as many as 32 youth in the facility, the detention facility, and I think in excess of 20 were charged with homicides, arrested with committing homicides. These are serious charges with the advent of 16 and 17-year-olds now underage the age. They're defined as adolescent offenders. And so while they are arraigned in the youth part of Superior Court, in fact, they're detained in juvenile facilities, specialized, secure, hopefully, if available. So maybe some comment on the type of population you're seeing in your facility, because you're really serving as a regional hub there, Commissioner.
Yeah, we're still seeing that, Bob, in our populations. I mean, and I got to say something about our judges, not only in the Ninth Judicial District, but across the state. And you hit it, Bob. Our family court judges do not put kids in detention unless they really need to be there. I mean, there's a great reluctancy on the part of our judges, and rightfully so, not to want to put a kid in detention if they don't need to be in detention. So that's why, we're not seeing any cream puffs coming into our detention facilities. These are kids who have committed some serious acts, and are a danger to our communities. And these are the type of kids that our family court judges, are sending to detention, and rightfully so. And it's an obligation on the part of the counties to make sure that we have space available, so that we can have these kids come into the facility, and the juvenile justice system, and the adolescent court, can do what it needs to do, by law. So, I just go crazy sometimes, when I hear the rhetoric, that we're getting kids, that the judges are putting kids in detention that don't need to be in detention. I always challenge people, come and look at the kids. I'll give you the case records, and you tell me whether or not that judge really had an option to do anything other than put this kid in detention. Because I'll tell you, if you look at the record, there were so many chances that were given to these kids before the judge finally made the decision to put that child in detention. So I think it's terrible sometimes, when I hear the onus being put on our judges.
Thank you, thank you.
I have to,
Mary Ellen?
agree with Rocco on that. Our family court judges do everything possible and use every alternative that we have to offer. It is a last resort with extremely dangerous youth, when they place a youth in detention. They use everything that we can offer, and then some. But sometimes, and it's not a lot of cases, but a very few cases that really require detention. And I have to thank Rocco as well, for helping out in those, situations. But the family court judges are really faced with a real dilemma in these circumstances.
I agree. Alan, I know you're representing, thank you, Mary Ellen, representing COPA on the call-in today. And usually we have the agencies going, but you were gracious enough to come up here, and we appreciate that. Maybe you want to say a little bit, because I know you're part of those communications that you're hearing from the directors.
Having said in several meetings, Bob, in which Christine talked about the problems that they've endured up there, I just can't help but think that this has been an abject failure from the start and from the top, that was laid upon the counties, that the counties were not prepared, and the counties were expected to magically grab a trowel and some mortar and throw up buildings and have these facilities. And the facility, the laws were implemented. There wasn't the time for this to go forth, to have the adequate detention facilities available, nor have they considered the transition of closed OCFS facilities and closed state prisons. To me, that's a potential remedy. Maybe, you have to make some alterations to it, but that would be easier to do, and at least you have a facility perhaps to keep somebody. And I concur with the fact that we're not running willy-nilly, just detaining people right and left over everything here and there. And nobody thinks that it's a good practice to take a kid who stole a bicycle and throw him in detention, and that's the first thing they've ever done. But when they stole the bicycle and they rode away on the bicycle and shot somebody, that's a different story. And I think that those are the factors that are probably getting overlooked. And I would dare say that the general public is probably blind to a lot of what's going on here. Because I think that if they were really aware, they would be up in arms, and deservedly so, to know that 3 probation officers from Jefferson County are sitting in a motel room detaining somebody. And hiring out for food and those sort of things going on. and there's serious crimes involved. So I think, again, I think it's an abject failure from the top, and we've been fortunate that there hasn't been tragic circumstances as a result.
Appreciate that.
Bob, can I make another statement here? We talk about the seriousness of the offenses that some of these kids have committed, but I also want to bring, attention to a lot of these kids having severe mental health issues. We're seeing a lot of it. We started seeing it, in our adult facilities, and we're seeing it now, in our juvenile facilities. And the other big issue is the lack, of beds, that statewide, that can be available to have, kids in a hospital that need to be in a hospital when we get these double remands. So that's a big issue also.
Thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate that. It's one of the reasons we do the mental health assessment right now, right? We're doing it as JD intake, PINS intake, because in fact, probation is seeing in excess of 50% of the youth coming through intake with some form of mental illness and real challenges. So a sad commentary on society and what we're doing with youth in this country, but a reality that needed to be stated, and I appreciate that. Other comments by any other members on the issue of juvenile detention? All right, I want you to know that we hear you. DCJS does not run the detention system. I'm not being critical of any other agency. I'm just saying that, but we are receptive to this, and I want you to know that we send this information to the Commissioner, First Deputy Joe Popkin. This information is communicated to the Office of Children and Family Services and the Chamber as well, so they're aware of it. All right, thank you. We're going to move on to some staff. I really appreciate the discussion. The staff reports, these will go fairly quickly. And I know we've got different people, what you're going to hear from different experts on these individual subjects. So I'm going to call on Gary to do the CHRE, the CE integration. This is the criminal history record information CE integration that is operating successfully. I do want to thank the members of the work group as well as Audemont, a great company that worked with us in implementing this and did, frankly, a number of system changes at our request. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Bob. I know you acknowledged him earlier, but I want to acknowledge Alan Frisbee for his deep involvement in this project. So again, as Deputy Commissioner Director Macro mentioned, that CHRI to CE integration, it's basically, when somebody's completing a pre-sentence investigation in Case Law Explorer, they can draw down the legal history from, DCJS to auto-populate into the PSI wizard. So, it's a significant, tool to save time, for probation professionals when they're completing pre-sentence investigations. Along with that, when that legal history is drawn down, it also sends a full copy of the individual's criminal history to the user's integrated justice portal inbox, for, I guess comparison to check. But there's also additional information that's on the full rap sheet that's not included in there. So there are other aspects that they need to review and include in the pre-sentence investigation. Alan was an advocate for, there are individuals that have long legal histories that have already been developed within Case Law Explorer. So, upon Alan's advocacy, basically departments on a case-by-case basis can select whether they're drawing down legal history or using the information that's already contained in the Case Law Explorer folder. So, it has, been rolled out to the probation departments. Audemont did a couple trainings recently on the last aspect that I mentioned, drawing down the history or using the history in the folders instead. So, it was, long process, but, again, I think it's a significant effort savings for probation professionals.
Thank you, Gary. Significant savings in labor, but also an increase in the accuracy of the criminal history, the PSI report, because we're not transposing that, we're not retyping it. It's coming directly from DCJS when you're pulling from the criminal history record information. Importantly, probation directors, please hear this. It's up to you to ensure that the practice of probation officers is to compare that rap sheet with that which has been downloaded, because there will be inevitably things missing. There won't be wants on there. There won't be state prison time and probation, revocations. All that's to be typed into the comments section. So it's due diligence is really important, not just by pulling it down and moving on with the pre-sentence investigation. And lastly, I'll say this. Directors, if you have not turned this on and made this available to your staff, please do so. The time of testing is over. Please give them this gift. I know in New York City, we've heard from Glenn Moises, and I'm sure Anna's aware of this is too, saying the officer's really grateful. They do quite a few pre-sentence investigations down there, but throughout the state. So
I would add, Bob, you talked about, checking for accuracy in one direction, but, the criminal histories do change over time. There could be things that were expunged or sealed. So there might be something that's existing in a legal history that shouldn't be referenced anymore either. So, for that purpose.
Great point. So there may be something in the CE folders where the sealing provision went into effect. So you need to compare the two, right, in that case. Alan, any comment? Because you were primary on this.
No, I think we've covered it in depth. It was an exhaustive process, and I thank you for your consideration of various things that were brought up during the time.
And I think there are other, refinements that you may have identified that we can look at in, subsequent initiatives. So we appreciate it.
I just want to say, directors, that got the stamp of approval from Alan Frisbee. That says something, right? Yeah, Commissioner Posey.
Bob, I want to tell you that, my probation officers would say you didn't hit a home run, you hit a grand slam with this one. They are so I get nothing but positive feedback that they're so happy that this was able to be done. It really helps them.
Great. Good to hear. All right, thank you. We're going to move on to any questions with that. We're going to move on to CE assessments and case planning. I think that's on Teresa Skinner-Hansen. And Teresa's going to report out on CE assessments and case planning and CE programs, all part of the CE suite.
So we have a number of automation initiatives that are being led out of the juvenile probation side of the house. CE assessments, as the commission may remember, we've talked about it in the past. CE assessments went live October 1st of 2022. Where we automated some additional screening tools inside of Caseload Explorer, namely the MAISY-2, the Rapid Indicator Tool, which is a sexual exploitation screener, and the Child Trauma Screen on the juvenile side. But while we were at it, we added additional screeners for the criminal court population, things like the IDA for the DWI population and a couple of others. CE assessments has been moving along, and in fact, it's one of the building blocks of additional automation initiatives that we have underway that I'll speak to in just a second. How's that, Bob? Then I'll move on to CE planning, shall I? So CE planning is another initiative that's been in conversation for several years. We started talking about that. We reviewed that with COPA prior to the COVID pandemic and discussed and refined the design of a uniform case plan for probation practice. The construction of the uniform case plan is essentially the same for criminal court populations as the family court population, with a change in language. The uniform design of the case plan meets all the regulatory requirements regardless of the phase or system point of the individual that it's built for. So CE planning has moved further underway. We have executed statements of work with Automon, and they have begun construction of the uniform case plan, which we refer to as CE planning. That will become visible in Caseload Explorer in the next couple months. We are, by the way, meeting every 2 weeks with Automon. to discuss that as well as some other automation projects. So CE planning, though, is also related to an integration that we're building with YASI, the Youth Assessment Screening Instrument for the family court and youth side of probation services. And the integration that is under construction right now involves several parties. So it involves Orbis Partners, who is our vendor for the YASI assessment. Of course, it also involves Automan, our vendor for Caseload Explorer, and they're building integrations that will have a probation officer be able to access YASI when it's built from Caseload Explorer into YASI, and then the YASI will transmit essential information back into Caseload Explorer to populate the uniform case plan. And then the probation officer will continue to complete the uniform case plan inside of Caseload Explorer. So that is under construction now. Orbis and Automan are meeting together to coordinate their efforts for integration. We will have a pilot group that gets together of practitioners. We'll invite practitioners to pilot that integration before it goes live across the state. And I think that's the gist of it. Anything I didn't mention?
I want to relate this back to what Mary Ellen said earlier, Director Mary Ellen Still, and that is case assessment and case planning is the foundation of good probation practice. It is where you start. A good assessment and a good case plan drives the interaction engagement of the client. If you don't have that as the foundation, then probation's intervention is going to be spacious. It's not going to be focused on the needs that drive the behavior. That's what we're interested in, helping that youth address the behaviors that got them involved in the criminal justice system. Commissioner Benitez was a pioneer in this area, a young pioneer, by the way, that did this with the IAP in New York City, recognizing the value of case planning, the individual assessment plan. We're going to have our own statewide plan, which is going to, New York City can join this, which is called the MAP, My Action Plan. It's written in youthful language. It'll be developed with the youth. The youth will leave and there'll be the task to be completed, what that skill we're working on for the next meeting. If they lose the map, we'll print out another one for them. Youth aren't good at hanging on to homework or any other papers, frankly. Report cards included, I think. So we're going to give them another case plan. We're going to focus on the drivers, the risk factors, the needs of youth. This, I think, is going to be the most significant thing we do in probation advancement in a long time, even more powerful than the CHREC integration, because this is going to drive practice. So I'm so optimistic about this and excited about our work. It's a lot of work. We have great partners in Waterman and Orbis partners on this.
Joe just passed me a note and said, how about Compass? So the longer term plan is to integrate Compass. But starting with YASI, allows us to build those efficiencies so that officers don't have to leave Caseload Explorer, enter the YASI Caseworks platform. They'll talk to one another. And like I said, auto-populate a lot of the elements that the probation officer develops in the YASI Caseworks software. And then, by the way, that automated case plan is also going to interact with the PRCR. So there's not a duplication of long-term goals, short-term goals, action steps, and so on.
And PRCR is the periodic reassessment case review, which is the quarterly requirement to take a fresh look at that case. So this is all going to be automated. The only thing the probation officer will be required to do is really develop the short and long-term goals and the tasks associated with that. That's the essence of case planning. All the things that can be automated will be automated, and they will have before them the results of that assessment. So a lot more training coming, but this is exciting. Any questions for Teresa on this?
Just a quick one, and I'm glad to hear that you mentioned about the blending of the PRCR, because that was one of my concerns, was that would it be a duplication? So that would replace like the initial PRCR, and then thereafter, do we doing PRCRs as are done currently?
You will continue to do PRCRs as you do currently. It will populate from the uniform case plan, the map, into the PRCR. So there'll be a relationship there with the duplicative sections.
Alan, are you asking about the initial PRCR being done as the initial case plan?
Is that the blend there, and then thereafter it just be PRCRs as it occurs now? Or the case plans continue and will continue and tie in 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road?
I think so, yes. The way that I'm understanding it currently, and I'm no John Adams, but each time an officer does the initial assessment, it'll populate back into Caseload Explorer. Every reassessment will behave the same way. So when they head into Yazi to do a reassessment, it will again populate back into Caseload Explorer into the uniform case plan. And the officer will build from there, and the uniform case plan will interact with the PRCR where there are common fields.
So the periodic case reassessment, case review will always be required because it's looking at contacts, home visits, circles of influence, all those other things that we're looking at. But what will happen is it'll update the short and long-term goals. Those things will be connected. So, and that's, Alan, as you know, the short and the long-term goals are the great frustration of probation officers because they're stressed with high volumes, and that's where you have to be creative. So more to come on that. But and we might actually ask you to join the committee.
I think currently, what has happened is the initial PRCR has been used as the case plan,
yes.
But that's not really what it's ideal for. So I think the case plan would serve that purpose. The PRCR would be evaluating, kind of compliance for the agency purposes. So I think they're separate but related.
I think a few years ago, we sat, might have been in this room or one of the other ones that had similar discussions. The case plan was also going to tie in the offender looking at it, and they're being aware of what is expected, as opposed to a PRCR is more from the house side of doing things.
That's right.
So
exactly.
It'll be printable, and yes.
Let's just remember that we developed the reassessment in case plan, the PRCR, to replace those quarterly reports where officers were spending hours on end typing quarterly reports, hopefully to review them by supervisors and then placing them in the file. We automated that process. We automated it to free up the time of the probation officer to spend more time with the client. So that's important. Please, excuse me.
Attendant to this, the amount, I just have to tell you from our experience in doing this, the amount of culture change that has to go in tandem with this, how you use a case plan. And it's easier said than done. No, you're supposed to negotiate all these, long-term and short-term goals because they're not supposed to be the officers. The tendency to do that is so, like the push to be in the language of the probation officer, you can tell a mile away in our IAPs that this was not a joint effort, that this was right. And I have to still stress that the map is much more elaborate than what may be ideal. I don't know, that's just my concern, has always been my concern. And so for it to be used appropriately and have all the data items used as well, so that they can, it's a monumental task that the training unit has to be, and then the follow-up within, the daily practice. So it's years. I'm just gonna say, it's just not gonna be something that it's gonna be able to happen, and then it's gonna happen, that's all.
Yeah, it's going to take time, but this will change practice.
No, trust me, I know that.
This will change practice from an enforcement monitoring to a true client engagement model, I think. And that's where we need to go as a state. There's no one out there doing this, by the way. No. I sit on the National Standards Committee, and other states aren't even close to where we are. All right, CE programs.
So
So CE programs has been deployed in the last few months. Jennifer Cox from our juvenile team has convened a statewide work group of practitioners that are looking at the functionality of the software system. And, so really implementing programs was twofold. It was to make available the CE programs functionality to all probation departments, to be able to look more extensively at the services that you're utilizing in your referrals. It also has the component for CE provider where your contracted programs can have a piece of access to report back and forth with the probation officer. So POs can refer in provider, the clinician can respond back in provider, and that automates all of that in lieu of perhaps sending an email or other mechanisms for exchanging attendance and updates between the provider and the PO. But in addition to that, Raise the Age funded services report to DCJS, to our research office, on a quarterly basis of service unit initiation for Raise the Age funded services. So another component for CE programs is to be able to automate that reporting as well, so that DCJS can just extract the data that we need instead of probation departments submitting quarterly Excel sheets, which are in most departments a hand count of service utilization initiation. So our goal, that's the second big piece of our goal with CE programs, is to automate that functionality.
And then lastly, what will happen is when an officer is developing the case plan, they'll go into their menu, their tenant of all of the juvenile programs. And I say to directors, don't stop at Raise the Age, include all your juvenile programs. Because now you can have outcomes associated with programs. It can tell you how kids are doing by program. And if you're not getting the right outcomes, you can go back and advocate with that program. I'm not getting the outcomes we need, right? But secondly, you're going to be able to pull that program into the case plan for that contact and all that other information. So to integrate the availability of juvenile programs with the case plan. So CE programs, Jennifer Cox is doing a great job. It is going to take us some time to get there. Directors, if you have not entered all your Raise the Age funded programs, and there's $39 million worth of them, that includes staffing. If you haven't included all those programs, please do that in CE programs, because it's a requirement to Raise the Age. We need to report back to the legislature. Our friends in research, OJRP, need to be able to determine what's the return on investment. Are we seeing better outcomes for children? That's the point of Raise the Age, right? So important. All right. Any question on CE programs? And I'm going to call on Gary and to go on the Compass transition to Compass R. If you can, thank you, Teresa. A great report and a lot of fine work being done. I appreciate that. And then next will be Nicole on the AIM system. Gary.
So New York Compass transition to Compass R. I think as the commission is aware, all the probation departments outside of New York City have used New York Compass as the general risk and need assessment for criminal court populations, whereas New York City has used the LSI family of assessments. We've been working with Equivant, the vendor for Compass, quite some time now to look at Compass R, which is their newest criminal court assessment product. And just as a reminder, everybody, New York Compass is a New York customized product. And with a customized product, that has brought certain challenges to us because, even when they've updated to a new version of the software, it's required extensive, testing from New York State ITS before it can be rolled out for use by probation professionals and a variety of other things. Additionally, one of the big appeals to Compass R is, again, it's the newest version, which is supported by Equivant, the vendor, but it also includes transparency. I think the body is probably well aware that risk and need assessments have experienced significant challenges by different parties over the years because of the behind the curtains functionality that how is this person being scored and placed at a certain risk or whatever. So Compass R is a transparent instrument. It's summative scoring, that basically if you can add, you should be able to determine how this assessment was scored and a person placed at a certain risk. But that being said, that's a big benefit for us and to the field. But additionally, as I mentioned, it is their most recent and current version of the assessment. So it's got the current research support, and it's kind of their national instrument. It's not a New York specific instrument. So we are working to develop a transition plan to Compass R, which would see training. We have a core of Compass trainers within the state already, including some OPCA staff, as well as probation professionals and ATI professionals. So our training plan would basically be those people who are already trained as trainers would receive training to basically provide orientation to people who've already been trained on this to bring them up to speed on it. Additionally, we would be exploring the potential to do additional train the trainer, so we could have additional trainers, that could serve the probation and ATI communities. So again, we're kind of in the process of evaluating and proceeding with statements of work for this to be able to roll all this out.
So thank you, Gary. We're shooting for September. There'll be a training requirement on this. The tool will not look completely different. In fact, it'll look very similar to New York Compass because it's within the family of the Compass suite, but it will be a more standardized version. We have Compass trainers. I want to note that a number of our ATIs, and Nicole's can comment on that next, utilize the New York Compass. They will be transitioned to the Compass R as well. So we're working very hard on this and looking to move forward. ITS is our partner on this as well. Any questions? I know this is an early, just a thumbnail on this, but we'll be having meetings going forward. Wanted to bring you up to date. We're waiting for, I think, the latest, greatest statement of work from Equivant. It's been a number of months we've been working. I just sent an email this morning asking for it. As soon as we get that, we can get that through the system. There'll be some costs associated with training primarily, which is required by Equivant, and then we'll develop the capacity and across the state to train. Any questions on Compass R? All right, Nicole Aldi, thank you, Gary, is going to come up and report on names, but maybe you can also mention, Nicole, the ATIs that'll utilize the Compass R, because I know a number of them. We do require, because we're an evidence-based shop, that all the ATI programs we fund utilize a standardized assessment tool approved by DCJS.
That is correct, Bob. The majority of the alternatives to incarceration programs that are funded by DCJS do utilize the New York Compass at this time. We do have a handful, especially down in the city, that do use the LSIR suite of assessments, but again, majority upstate, the rest of the state, I should say, do utilize the New York Compass, and therefore they are set to the same requirements of identifying the risk and dosage of what the individual needs to be provided with regards to programming based off of that assessment. So we will be looking to bring those programs onto the Compass R. And as being a trainer for the New York Compass is one of the trainers we have at OPCA, it'll be very helpful to have a assessment that is a national instrument. A lot of questions come about how things are weighted and the transparency of the instrument. So it will be very enlightening to be able to provide that information to the trainees. So, as Bob mentioned earlier, DCJS is currently working with the Center for Justice Innovations and to contract the AIMS pretrial case management system for pretrial services agencies in New York State. This system will allow for integration with Caseload Explorer, and as we identified, the majority of the pretrial services agencies are run by probation. This will be a system that is available to the entire state, except for New York City, as CJA has their own systems, and it will avoid some duplication by probation departments of having to provide data in one area and then have to provide data in another area that is required by statute for bail reform regarding what the practices are in cases and such to OCA for their annual information. So that will be consolidation of work that I think a lot of people will be very excited about. And it'll also allow for the, I think the data to be more accurate too. We found that once you get a place where there's putting information in one place, it's very helpful instead of multiple places when you're transpiring that. So again, very early on with that, as Bob mentioned earlier, I know that Deputy Commissioner DeFrucio and our finance and our OPDF program are currently really getting in that beginning to get the contract through CJI so we can get started. And it is a cloud-based case management system, which will be very helpful without getting into the nitty-gritties, but that'll allow for access to be given to the programs in many different facets instead of being some place where you have to get certain permissions to get onto this base. You'd be able to get access from almost anywhere with the permissions you're provided. And we do have a proposal by Audemon. It's a little bit dated, but it is very, very thorough about what is needed for for the integration and to really help lighten the load on what is required for these pretrial services agencies.
Just adding that, what we see from this too is the ability to have a statewide database. We'll pull this information into a data file and share with OCA. So, this will replace the monthly or bi-monthly reports.
Yes.
It would be standardized and you would have it in such a form instead of spreadsheets. It would be data where your people can analyze it more readily. So it would be a real service to OCA, and DCJS and OCA, as Anthony has said earlier, do a great job in their collaboration on the research. I know that Dr. Lee Bates has a wonderful relationship with OCA and kind of came there and the researchers. So this is something that'll be a win-win for OCA and DCJS in terms of a statewide database. There'll be integrations built in for notifications. So probation officers will get notifications they can send out and alert people to court appearances. Hopefully we'll increase our court appearances, decrease the requirement for warrant letters and then ultimately warrants and failure to reports. So this will be a much more effective system going forward. So we're working pretty busily on getting that going. Any comments, questions for Nicole and Dina? I don't know whether you want to weigh in on this.
I know just the status update as far as our grant shop is working on the paperwork required to hopefully contract with CJI, as a single source due to the relationship that they currently have with OCA. And we're doing all that to get that through OSC, and so it's the beginning of the process, but we're moving forward.
Thank you. I appreciate your support on that, and Joe Hopkins as well. All right, and I think that's it, Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. Nicole's pretty busy there too. The master statement of work I can cover. Parts of it is juvenile, but I can summarize in that we have developed what I call the master statement of work that includes all the changes to CE regarding juvenile, financial restitution, and adult. I think, Teresa, the initial plan was 12 pages of changes, if I'm not mistaken, 12 pages.
It was a lot.
And it took us hours, three-hour meetings with Audemon to go through. They have sent us a statement of work. We reviewed it carefully. Teresa's unit has really done a lot of due diligence on this. Thank you. And we have what will be a proposal. It's a couple $100,000. Some of it will be raise the age funding, certainly, because it pertains to raise the age, to implement refinements in Caseload Explorer. Their bandwidth has been limited, a little limited thus far, because they're doing case planning, but they will get to the master statement of work as well. So more on that to come. And then I do want to say that I've asked Gary and Teresa and training to work together to come up with an application that we would send out to the field to trainers to come in and train on CE. I want to set up a system where we're doing monthly trainings on CE by probation practitioners. I think that's badly needed. Any probation officer who is skilled and can represent to us that they have, some affinity for CE and are trained in it can sign up. We'll do regular, ongoing, rotating trainings in CE. I think that's absolutely essential to bring up the practice. It will result in more accurate data. Teresa's unit spends a lot of time with the departments, of course, in working toward more complete data, more accurate data. That's essential for raise the age and so many other aspects of our work, right? So more to come on that. And at this point, any questions on any of those updates? I know if your head is spinning, if it's not, I can't imagine why not, because certainly mine is. We have a lot going on in probation in New York State today. I am going to move, and by the way, if you feel inclined, the restrooms, I should have said this from the beginning, they're right outside the door and to the left, the men's room to the ladies' room to the right. Please feel free to, take a break if you need to. But I want to keep us going through because these are going to be pretty quick report outs. Regulatory amendments, I don't want to say much about 349. I put a copy in your file just for the Commission's information, but we have long implemented now about 349. Matt Charton was the chair of that work group. I want to acknowledge his work and the members of the work group. We have a very solid intrastate regulation now. I'll point to one accomplishment. There are several in there, but for me, the most important was the conflict of interest cases where neighboring or contiguous probation departments, as a courtesy, were providing supervision when there existed a conflict within the department. And frankly, the order of the court was to supervise this individual. But there may have been a conflict, perhaps a family member or some other conflict. And a neighboring county would take on that task of supervision. But there was liability there because there was never the approval of the court. This change requires the approval of the sentencing court. Jurisdiction does not change because it is not a transfer. It's a courtesy supervision of sorts. So what is transferred is the supervision, not the legal jurisdiction. But it does require the sign off of the court. I always thought, God forbid something happened, and the judge would have read this in the newspaper saying, I was never aware that in fact, this individual is being supervised by a neighboring county. So clearly the court must be made aware of this and get the approval of the court, which I think will be forthcoming in these cases. So 49 is in effect. Part 357, I am going to defer to Teresa. Just Teresa, we implemented this, just a couple notes on that.
Yep, Part 357 was promulgated March 27th. Primarily subsequent to the change in the PINS definition after a couple of bills had been passed into law about stemming from the repeal of Penal Law 240.37, loitering for prostitution had to come out of the PINS definition, as well as Penal Law 22105, a violation level marijuana offense subsequent to the cannabis law change. So while we opened it up for that definition, we also inserted some language about maximum periods for electronic monitoring pursuant to court orders when that court order for PINS diversion youth did not contain timeframes, and some other language. But Part 357 only applies to those probation departments that perform PINS diversion services.
Thank you, Teresa. A lot of work there going on, and certainly we had the Office of Legal Service Assistants there, and we appreciate their work. Very extensive. Maybe you want to, while you're there, also report on 356, which is JD intake and where that is.
Yeah, so 356, we had released in October of 22 in a draft form to probation directors, COPA and POA, for review of a couple of modifications put forward by our team. primarily driven by race and lower age, changing the definition of juvenile delinquent. But we also included some modifications to Article 3 from 2019 that had been changed in law just after our last revision of 356. So we used this opportunity to catch up on some of that language from a 2019 law change. We're proposing to add sexual exploitation screening that mirrors the legal and regulatory requirement that exists for PINS diversion. We are also proposing to insert the juvenile contact substitution that exists in Part 351 already for adjudicated JD or PINS youth. Our proposal here is to allow for juvenile contact substitutions for JD adjustment kids. And some other recommendations from COPA's review to us with regard to language inside of the text. So that has also proceeded to our legal office, is not yet posted with the Department of State for public comment.
Thank you, Teresa. That'll take some time because it does require going through the division of the budget and the chamber rulemaking review process. Any questions on 356? Obviously, we work closely with the New York State Council of Probation Administrators and incorporated those changes that were suggested by the Park Committee. So I think we've got a solid rule there. Patty reported out on Part 356. I do want to note within your packets, you have copies of those regulations, as well as on 349, all new forms were amended. Some forms were amended, other forms for the conflict of interest cases were developed. So all those forms are in the packet for you members. And we can certainly resend that to directors, but that's all been sent out. So that concludes the regulatory amendments. At this time, we're going to just go through, we really have just program updates, which is a report out. And then I'll cite some upcoming events and make you aware of certain pieces of legislation. And we'll call the meeting to a conclusion because I know it's been going on for some time. So program updates, I want to ask Gary Goebel, if you would, Gary, come up and address the probation GIVE model. GIVE is the gun violence elimination program. It's a program that DCJS funds, has funded for some 10 years. It totaled $18 million this year under the commissioner's inspired and capable leadership, I'll say, increased the funding to $36 million. Office of Public Safety oversees this grant. It is specifically designed to address gun violence in 17 jurisdictions. This year, with double the funding, we expect to expand it and also implement a uniform probation model. Yeah.
I think, again, the commissioner is likely aware, but beginning last year within the GIVE initiative, we included a standardized model for the supervision of individuals on supervision for gun convictions. And as Bob mentioned, it's the 17 counties originally outside of New York City where 80% of the violent crime in the state occurs. With this year, with GIVE, 4 additional counties have been added, and this is across the board, not probation specific, but Hewitt, Jefferson, Tompkins, and Chemung were added this year as well, so 21 counties. Basically, the model that we proposed last year was included, and again continuing this year. It's both including stabilization efforts as well as cognitive behavioral intervention and employability, things that are going to promote lasting change within persons on supervision for gun crimes. From our critical incident reviews, it's not uncommon that somebody who's on probation for a gun crime could either reoffend or be the victim of violent crime. So we're trying to reduce opportunity for both of those things, reduce opportunity for recidivism, but also reduce opportunity to become a victim. Importantly, Bob mentioned the overall increase of funding to the GIVE jurisdictions, But from last year to this year, I believe the increase to probation departments went from approximately 1.8 million for those 17 to, I think it's up to 6 million or more for what is now 21 counties. So significant increase in the funding to probation departments. And importantly, in the award letters to the GIVE partners, there, for the first time, there was a specified minimum to be dedicated to probation within those award letters. So it is reflective of the important work that probation is doing. So, you know, that's, you know, it in a nutshell. You know, we're going to continue to work with the probation departments, you know, including the newest counties who have been added, as well as, you know, continue to work with those, you know, who've already been involved in GIVE to, you know, continue refining their implementation.
Gary, will this be among the subjects that will be discussed at the law enforcement conference in the fall, or we've had various?
I mean, for the public safety symposium, I don't know if specifically we proposed anything on this. We did last year, but you know, some of the other things that we've contemplated is you know, even setting up, you know, virtual, you know, regional meetings or otherwise, where just, you know, the probation departments could get together to exchange ideas and so forth. I mean, whether it's in person or virtual, but we didn't specifically propose anything for public safety this year. But again, I mean, that's a large discussion, you know, across the board at public safety symposium. We did propose a kind of just a probation roundtable, which I would expect that would be one of the topics discussed.
Absolutely. Probation directors, I want to say this, that for the GIVE jurisdictions, thank you. I know that we met several times with detailed discussions. And then prior to the applications being submitted, I called you individually and spoke to you because we cared that much about getting it right and ensuring that you had the resources to really manage the high risk, greatest risk gun-involved individual that you're seeing. 6-8% of the individuals sentenced to probation are convicted of gun crimes. But in Erie County, and Michelle I see is on the line, that's 18%. 18% of individuals sentenced to probation supervision are convicted of CPW in Erie County. So the challenge is great. It's not just an enforcement program and offender accountability, greatest risk, stabilization, GPS, but it also requires cognitive behavioral intervention and employment. We want to help these people make a difference in their lives. We want to give them an opportunity to choose a different path. So we're pairing this up with employment-focused services programs, which you're going to hear more about in the future. We're funding a number of very successful employment-focused services programs. I'm looking at John Cicchetti up in Niagara County, great program that he and Debbie LaRock run. So we really want to pair that with employment-focused services programs, training programs that offer stipends to youth so they have the resources to divorce themselves from the gang culture. And that's what we're trying to do in New York State, evidence-based work. Any questions on the GIVE?
Is there a particular CBT intervention that is used for GIVE, or is there a curriculum? Or?
There isn't specifically. I think, you know, jurisdictions will identify, you know, different programs. I know there has been interest, and that's something that we continue to explore. You know, I know that, you know, like right in Chicago, for example, I think, you know, working with this type of population has developed something with that you know, specific for their population. But I think initially, you know, what we're looking at is the cognitive behavioral interventions that are available to probation departments at this point, whether it's, you know, thinking for a change or decision points, interactive journaling. So starting with the tools that, you know, are available to various probation departments to begin with.
Do we know, like, is there a skewing towards young people in the group that gets GIVE or not? Because part of what I'm thinking is that we were doing and continue to do a training in New York City of a CBT program specifically designed for young people in the throes of violence that was developed in a partnership between Mass General and ROCA, which is a program an anti-violence program in Chelsea, Massachusetts. That would be interesting to look at.
Sure.
Again, if it skews younger, they're adapting this to older populations, but it's really mostly a youth 18, 19 and 24 and under.
I would say, Bob, if I recall correctly, and I think, Matt was heavily involved in it, the kind of internal research project that we did a few years ago, looking at some of the curriculum instances, it was a little bit older than I think we initially expected it to be. But again, it's not like they're 40 years old, it is going to be a younger group.
Honestly, the intervention is still applicable. When we had one group of quote unquote adult probation officers take it, they were like very resistant, but because it had been developed for young people, but it's really the same brain issues, but
Thank you, because we'll take a look at that for the younger population, do some work and see if we can offer that and make it available to the departments. We have seen a lot of interest in the decision points, working with Dr. Julia Tains and Dr. Steve Swisher. Departments really jumping on that, not only for the regular population, but for the DUI population, which Michelle heads up. Great interest in decision points because it's very focused and limited. Because some of the NIC thinking for a change can go on for 45 hours, right? Yeah. So
In using decision points as an example, I don't want to put Mary Ellen on the spot, but last year at the Public Safety Symposium, Sandy Carroll did come up to present with Juliana Tamans on decision points with this population. So, that was, great presentation last year. So thank you for letting Sandy come up last year.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the suggestion. This is why we wanted to include you on the probation commission. All right, next is program update on, we addressed that, the inclusion of the orientation.
Rocco wants to say something.
Yes, absolutely.
Rocco.
Oh, yes, Rocco.
Bob, I just want to thank you, Bob, and I want everybody to know that that extra money that we got it because of you. Okay, we know what you did up there, the advocating that you did for the probation departments, and the great work that we have been doing for a number of years in the GIVE program. But being that we were doing the great work didn't mean we were going to get that money. It was your advocating that got that for us. So I want to personally thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of all the GIVE, counties that benefited by your advocacy. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, and I really appreciate the sentiment. But let me say this, directors. I could have advocated, but without the team, of Dean and Joe Popkin and Rosanna Rosado, we would not have gotten the money. And it's because of the fact that the chamber regards DCJS so highly, and that the work that we do, the team of the Office of Public Safety, OPCA, but also the executives, and bringing that message to the governor herself. These people sitting down with the governor herself and saying, this is what we need and probation needs to be a part of it. It wouldn't have occurred. So, I appreciate that. So thank you. But thanks I appreciate you saying it. We've covered a lot of this. We covered the inclusion of the YASI training. We covered the BCPO. Teresa, the fourth bullet down is, Teresa, would you come up and take a seat and just tell us about the quality assurance? This is a significant activity that I think bears a little discussion. We have implemented, as part of the Raise the Age, of course, we have strengthened our juvenile probation operations team. And that is headed by Teresa Scano Hansen, very experienced from Rensselaer County. Teresa tells me regularly that she now has the dream job of her life. And believe me, she does, and she believes it. She loves her work, and she's effective at it. She's great at it. So we implemented a quality assurance review, an extensive one where we're working with counties. This is not a one visit. This is a 12-month intervention. And we've taken up residents and working with 2 jurisdictions, and I want to applaud the directors, but I'm going to let Teresa talk about this. Teresa, please relate that to the RFK work, of course, with.
So as we've talked about in the commission before, the vision for the juvenile probation operations team, not only in implementing Raise the Age throughout the state, but also being able to provide technical assistance to juvenile or youth probation systems throughout New York. One piece of that is our direct provision of jurisdiction-specific technical assistance. And we've modeled that after our initial project with Dutchess Probation. And thank you, Mary Ellen, for allowing us to join you with the RFK Probation System Review. Mary Ellen's jurisdiction was awarded a grant prior to COVID to work with the RFK, National Alliance on Juvenile Justice, to do a probation system review, really predicated on that framework. And we were able to participate with Dutchess and have taken the lessons we've learned from that national model of probation system review that we observed with you all and translated that for New York State. We've taken the pillars of the probation system review model and applied that now. We're in our second jurisdiction. We began a year ago, just over a year ago with Onondaga County. And essentially the process mirrors the probation system review, but we focus on 3 primary system points with the probation department. One is with regard to juvenile delinquency immediate petitions to family court. The second is the juvenile delinquency adjustment rates at probation. And the third is related to the racial and ethnic disparity rates at those or other processing points. So we have some customized data tables that we've been able to look at with those departments. We review policy with the jurisdictions. We map out their system, who makes decisions when, and then work with the jurisdiction to develop their own plan of action around any modifications they want to make to their system structure to improve outcomes in those areas that I mentioned. So we began with Onondaga a year ago, and we began with Westchester just prior to the end of the year. And we continue with those 2 jurisdictions at different points in their progress. So we're excited to continue that work. We love it. The juvenile team is really interested in discussing policies, looking at data, working with those probation departments to understand the data and what informs the decisions that they're making about how they process youth cases. So
one whatever suggestion or so when I was deputy in juvenile and we're looking at diversion, we're obsessed with diversion numbers. Like it was the same overall number for a long time, even though we were making strides in other places. And diversion is so sensitive to the types of cases that come in, right? So if you have an influx of gun cases or whatever, your numbers are going to go down. So what we did was then we decided to look at we created a matrix that we had created for the deep end, right? But adapted it to the front end to look at charge severity of the cases coming in paired with risk level of the RAI that we give in the beginning, even though technically it's for judges to use for detention, but it still helped us, put together targets for so if you had a class B misdemeanor and you had a kid who was scoring low risk first, presumption is diversion. And that number of diversion needed to be in the 70%, 80% diversion rate, adjustment rate. Whereas as you went up in severity, and then the presumption would be no diversion, and then the middle was professional judgment based on any number of items, right? And then we looked at specific combinations of boxes where we wanted high diversion, and that's what we focused on. We stopped focusing on overall diversion. We focused on very specific combinations of risk and offense severity to really drive the practice of low-risk kids and low levels out. We don't want you guys in the system kind of thing. And that helped us a lot in.
So you brought structure and quantification to
just looking at the practice, because then, I didn't want our officers to feel like they were not exercising good judgment if they were not diverting certain cases.
Right.
But I did want some pressure on why aren't you, these cases, the question is, why did you divert? It's why didn't you? Whereas some of the other cases might have been, then what was the diversion decision here? Because that's kind of like a more, but it's still room for it, right? But, you know, it allowed for a much more nuanced conversation, discussion, and policy planning for each of those kinds of situations.
Excellent. Yeah. That's great. Comments, Mary Ellen?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we really appreciated the opportunity to go through the process, even though it was during COVID. So it presented some unique challenges, but it was quite an opportunity. And I'm so happy to hear other counties are now going to have an opportunity to experience it. But it is ongoing. It didn't stop with the end of the technical assistance. Actually, today, we're meeting with family court judges. We're reviewing orders and conditions of probation. We have our county attorneys. And so we're looking to follow through on some of the recommendations on those orders. The other, there were many significant impacts, but another was a recommendation to attach a researcher analyst to the department, which we have done, which allows us to do the types of things that Anna is mentioning. And that has been a great boost for us to really be able to look at performance measures and outcomes and tie those into risk levels and what the results of, say, the YASI, so on and so forth. So I think the technical assistance had outcomes beyond what originally we had envisioned, and just really continue and really help change the entire juvenile system, not just probation. So thank you, we appreciated it.
Thank you for your leadership and stepping into that opportunity. Yeah, you all are doing really great work.
And I think I sent out to the directors a monograph of that RFK had written.
Yes.
And specifically cites Dutchess County Probation. So it was pretty interesting. I do want to thank Mary Ellen for raising her hand at the right time and agreeing to be the department. And I also want to thank Phil Galuppi and Rocco Posi for raising their hands, the leadership in those departments, and saying, Bob, we'll do this. We'll step up. We will be coming to a place close to you soon. We're looking for a third jurisdiction, or a fourth if we include Dutchess, a fourth jurisdiction to begin the work, because this is a 12-month process. It includes everything from policy analysis to training to resources, data review, et cetera. So these are leaders in the probation community who raise their hands and say, we'll do this, we'll take this on. So it's good work, and this is an outcome of Raise the Age too. We want to be evidence-based, but we want to, what we say is Raise the Age shrunk the system in general for youth, but it didn't shrink it for everybody equally. Black and brown kids are still dramatically overrepresented in the juvenile justice system in New York State, and that's something that we're working hard to address. Right? So, thank you. Any questions for Teresa or even Mary Ellen or Anna at this point? Comments? Thank you, Teresa. Really, really good. I appreciate that. Next, Nicole, and then Michelle Clark, just to come up and talk briefly about how funding has been increased. And then I'm going to ask Dean if he would like to make any comment. Again, this didn't occur just magically. The increase in funding occurred because of the leadership team that Commissioner Rosado has established at DCJS, including Joe Copley, Dean DeFruciale, Annette Harris, et cetera, the entire team up there, and their credibility with the chamber. Nicole.
So as you all are aware, the recently passed budget for 23-24, New York State doubled the alternatives to incarceration funding to $31.4 million. So huge expansion. And the ATI community is very excited and looking forward to looking at ways to adding additional programs, expanding current models, looking for new models of programming and what works and evidence-based practices and alternatives to incarceration. And most importantly, working with the community and other criminal justice entities to see what is needed out there. We've learned a lot with our NERN and our implementation work that we do here that DCJS is a big proponent of, that it really is important to reach out and say what is needed, what does your community need, because everybody is unique and have unique variants of resources. So again, we're just working on those plans to get that money spent and spent well. So I don't know if you have any other further questions with that.
So you will see an RFA, several RFAs out there going out. We're beginning that careful work to expand these models. And just in the interest of time, we'll be brief, but there are a number of programs that we were not able to fund because we ran out of money at the last RFP. So Nicole and
about 11 of them that we're looking at.
Michelle are looking at those programs carefully and are working with OPDF to reach out to those programs and say, are you still interested? So we can get these programs, which I refer to as shovel ready, and be able to implement these programs. Thank you, Nicole. Any questions for Nicole? So
just I want to add that it's a nice split that we've looked at too between New York City and the rest of the state too for that programming. So it's not just concentrated in one area.
Exactly. Programs in New York City. Thank you. Michelle Clark is going to report out on the expansion of the County Reentry Task Forces, which she and her team spend quite a bit of time on, and then just a brief discussion, presentation on the relationship with the Department of Labor, which continues. Michelle.
So, similar to what Nicole just mentioned, we received some increased funding for the County Reentry Task Forces, about triple what we had recently, and we had gone a very long time without an increase in the funding for the CRTF. So it's a very welcome increase. And continue our efforts to increase public safety by providing essential stabilization resources to formerly incarcerated individuals and their families. So throughout New York State, several probation departments co-chair the County Reentry Task Forces currently. So conversations will ensue, shortly to get their input as well for enhancing currently funded CRTFs. And moreover, we are, as Bob mentioned, exploring counties for expansion. Increasing the number of counties that would be receiving County Reentry Task Force services based on variables, most importantly, DOC's release data that we are working closely with DOC's and OJRP, our Office of Justice Research and Performance on. So conversations with counties will be taking place for that endeavor as well. So stay tuned on that. And then the next piece is, I just wanted to acknowledge our OPCA staff here, Melinda Vick and Taylor Alfred, who work in my unit, and Frank Cangiano, as well as the probation departments across the state for a collaboration that started last year in regional meetings with the New York State Department of Labor and DCJS to create workforce development opportunities for youth and adults. So there's a lot of money, that our governor, our state has put into initiatives with the DOL, and we want to be able to make sure that individuals on probation supervision are able to benefit from those opportunities. So collaboratives are taking place now across 10 regions with probation departments and local DOLs as well as ATI programs to implement a referral process for those on probation or engaged in ATI to be a part of an initiative such as the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, which serves 16 to 24-year-olds who are looking for workforce opportunities, as well as many other DOL initiatives. So I just wanted to mention that these partnerships exist. We are thankful that probation departments and staff continue to participate in these regional meetings that happen maybe quarterly, and it's been very helpful, and it will certainly serve those on probation importantly to help them get employment and sustain employment.
Thank you, Michelle. I want to tell you that those workshops that Michelle does informs our thinking too about the need for the employment-focused services program. So that's definitely influencing us how we expect to use the money for the employment-focused services programs. Probation directors. There are EOCs across the state, these wonderful educational opportunity centers. I'm going to pick on Monroe for a minute. I was just telling Dean earlier, but we visited the EOC in Monroe County, a 6-story building, as I recall. And we went up to the 6th floor of the elevator opens, and it looks like the intensive care unit of a hospital where they're training nursing assistants. These are good paying jobs. Very good paying jobs. And the healthcare industry, I sent out to directors and I sent a note to our commissioner. The healthcare industry needs workers desperately, and these are good paying jobs. So please note that. Visit your EOC, see what's available. Everything from salon care, welding programs, to nursing assistants. They are incredible in what the State Department of Education funds. Included in them are the laboratories for data processing.
Attain Labs.
Attain Labs, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. So the Attain Labs, I think they're present in 25 jurisdictions. You can learn everything from basic computing all the way up to advanced in every program. So many, many resources the state has. Please avail yourselves of those resources. Any questions from Michelle? Dean, would you like to comment on the additional funding?
Oh, sure. As Bob said, and Nicole and Michelle, DCGS has been very fortunate over the past 2 years especially to get increased funding to help us combat gun violence, develop innovative new funding streams, and also obviously fund a lot of our many great programs that we have already. So as Nicole and Michelle did state, with Bob and the great staff, they've developed plans for that additional funding for the ATI and the CRTFs. We're currently solidifying those plans and presenting them to the chamber as our plans for how we would designate those funds. And then we'll obviously have more discussions with chamber and move forward from there.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate that. Any questions? All right, the upcoming events, I'm just going to go through them quickly and then give you a heads up on awareness pending legislation. One, we have the Outstanding Service Award to a Probation Officer nominations. We extended the deadline through this Friday. We have received a couple of applications. We'll be looking at those closely, but if you have a deserving officer, please bring that to our attention. Last year, the recipient was a probation officer from New York City, Joe Figueroa, and I came to really admire Joe Figueroa's work. I'm a big fan of the work that he's doing. Really a fine young probation officer who I met at the POA conference and was really pleased to give him that award. And I can't just say enough about, the training and the spirit and the recruitment of officers like that in New York City. So very deserving. So nominate someone if you have a candidate. Secondly, COPA, conference coming up in Oswego this year. Different. Don't go to Lake Placid. Go to Oswego. That's where COPA will be this year, right? Anything, Alan, you want to say on that?
It's the usual time period of the Monday afternoon through Wednesday morning at the Best Western Hotel and Conference Center.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll be addressing the directors on Tuesday afternoon, I believe. The award ceremony is Tuesday evening. And we're going to talk about warrants, one of my favorite subjects, I think. So that's going to happen. POA, July 26th, 28th, Syracuse, another, what I think will be another wonderful conference. Joe, maybe you want to comment on that?
Sure. It's Wednesday through Friday. It's 2.5 days. They're running 3 tracks of really quality training. The topics have already been set. I know your staff is always putting together some fine training too. We always appreciate that. Look forward to it. And I thank Phil Galuppi for hosting us again. This is the 2nd year in a row we are going there because we had such a great experience with the hotel and the facility and the training, and everything was excellent. I will say that one of the new topics that we're looking at that will be coming in is a therapy dog. There's going to be something, we're looking at that. So stay tuned for details. And we do have some scholarships available, and I believe your office is providing some as well.
That's right.
So we look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of people there again. It's a good time.
OPCA is putting on 4 workshops, I think, at that
I believe,
conference.
yes.
Yeah, so it really promises to be another great work program. I call it the premier training event in New York State because we can train 175 officers in 2 or 3 days. Pretty good deal. Return on investment. Matt and I will be going to the Ignition, I guess Kelly and I will be going to the Ignition Interlock Conference. No, excuse me. The Ignition Interlock Conference is coming, I skipped. August 8th is the Ignition Interlock Program Conference over on La Plaza. Michelle is here, as well as Lenny Price are hitting that up. Michelle, did you want to comment on anything on that?
It's going to be very exciting. We're really addressing the actual problem with impaired drivers. And it's our hope that we're able to share, like you said, all those new tools that we require for people to help that population.
Thank you. By the way, Michelle and Lenny have been working with 3 jurisdictions in pilot programs for non-installer, IID non-installer enforcement programs. Saratoga, Monroe, and Nassau County have all joined. This is a grant that we received from the Governor's Traffic Safety Commission for $135,000 or so that we'll be distributing to those 3 jurisdictions. And that'll be kicked off during this week.
35,000 each.
Yeah.
Between the 3.
Exactly.
And the kickoff for Saratoga has already occurred. Nassau next week, I believe, or I'm sorry.
The 31st
and Nassau next week.
and then the 7th,
Great.
right.
So it comes with a 4-hour training, followed by targeted enforcement of individuals who do not install ignition interlocks in their motor vehicles or on probation supervision in an effort to improve traffic safety. So thank you, Lenny, for your work on that. Gary as well, appreciate that. So that's August 8th, by the way, is the Ignition Interlock Conference, as Michelle has said. The Governor's Highway Safety Association, Michelle will be attending that in New York City, right? Lenny may as well. First time we've had the Governor's Highway Association here in some time. So please take a look at that. APA, 26th to the 30th. And Rocco and Anna, I'll see you there, and many other directors as well. Veronica Cunningham has reached out to us, so we've been supporting their work in bringing APA to New York City. The ICAOS, this is Kelly. I have not had the opportunity, but I want to do it now to congratulate Kelly here on her promotion to manager of the interstate unit. Congratulations. I will tell you that Kelly is probably the longest lasting employee, the longest standing employee with OPCA. Began as an intern while she was getting her degree at SUNY at Albany and worked in the interstate unit. Kelly has done every job associated with interstate, not only on the adult world, but juvenile, where she currently serves as the Deputy Compact Administrator for the Interstate Compact for Juveniles. And as recently as last week, attended a conference in Lexington on rulemaking. So she represents us very well there. And I appreciate that. But now I have designated her as Compact Administrator, as Deputy Compact Administrator for Adult Services on the probation side. On the parole side, it's Scott Hurto. So with that comes a lot of work, Kelly. Kelly has been instrumental in advising Matt Charton and I on our work with the National Office and the Rules Committee. And I want to acknowledge Matt's promotion as well as Gary's to assistant directors. Again, Matt oversees VER, ATI and Interstate, and Gary, Juvenile, Adult, and Training Bureaus. But congratulations to them. I think we might have done that at the last meeting, but I'm going to take another round of applause for this. So, thank you, Dean. And then lastly, the Public Safety Symposium is coming up the 26th to 28th. By the way, register early. I won't say register often, but register at least once, because we think they're going to have 800 to 1,000 people attend this year. Thank you. And I suggest you participate in that, some quality programming.
A quick comment. I just want to advocate that both the IID conference and the public safety symposium, there's no charge to attend. So,
Good.
I mean, it is important and, you know, to make those available.
It's a good thing. It's a great point. You may have to pay for parking, though. That's about it. And parking in your own lunches. Outstanding upcoming events. New business for awareness only. There are several bills. Senate Bill 775, Ignition and Talk program. It expands program. I am aware that COPA wrote a letter in opposition to this proposed law. I understand the impact for additional work. I do think, however, if it is signed into law, it will dramatically reduce drunken driving across the state. We have requested additional funding from the Governor's Traffic Safety Commission. No guarantee yet. They haven't ruled on that application to get additional resources to probation departments.
I would say that was signed by the Senate. I believe Mann was in town yesterday, even advocating the Assembly sign. So that's the status of that.
So we'll continue to track this bill. I can't say what the outcome will be. I do note, though, the reservations, concerns of probation directors. Senate Bill 211 is the clean slate. That's in various stages of review and approval. Senate Bill 6282 would actually eliminate certain probation fees other than the statutory DWI fee. I'm not quite sure what will happen with that. And then, of course, A6544, which we've seen, Teresa and I've seen come and go, and I'm not sure where that is in the process without, we have the tracking, we know where they are, but I just give you the brief update on those for this forum. So those are the bills for awareness that you can take a look at. The PINS law really does a lot of good things that, frankly, needed to be done, and that concludes the new business. Other business. Any questions so far? By the way, and I know the hour is late. We're right at 1 o'clock, so we're timely. Any questions or comments on any of the agenda items we've had today? Other business or new business, I would just want to note that Onondaga County Probation Director Phil Gillespie received the Saratella Fasold Leadership and Humanitarian Award. That was developed in the spirit of our wonderful former state director, Saratella Fasold, who embodied evidence-based work in probation, advancement, and value training, but also approached the work from both a strong leadership position, as many of you know, as well as a real humanitarian. And that's a great award, and it was my honor, and Gary accompanied me, to present that to Phil last month before his entire probation department, the Onondaga County Probation Department, with the county executive there as well, and the deputy county executive. So again, congratulations, Phil. Well deserved for your leadership. So that concludes our business today. Any final comments, questions? Our next meeting will be Thursday, November 16th, 2023. I look forward to that meeting. I do want to wish all of the directors on the line, everyone here, a wonderful summer. Be careful and take good care of yourselves. We need each and every one of you to return to probation. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No. Yes, you came out.